Its wolf-like jaws glisten with saliva. It prowls endlessly through the darkness, searching for its prey. Its mind is simple, yet its technology is impossible. What is this terrifying being? While there is never any shortage of the inexplicable and even the downright absurd at the SCP Foundation, few creatures manage to be both in equal measure. Then there's SCP-6662. This is the designation given to a Keter-class entity that remains free from Foundation containment, since it cannot be physically confined to a single location. Instead, the Foundation has had to come up with measures that allow them to observe the creature from a safe distance without provoking it, while also making sure that civilians remain unaware of its existence. To achieve this goal, they have implemented several diversionary tactics in order to manipulate SCP-6662 to spend its time searching more remote, unpopulated areas. Searching for what, you might ask? Well, we guarantee you would never guess. Let's dive a little deeper into exactly who or what SCP-6662 is, and what coveted treasure it spends its time searching for. SCP-6662 is described in its file as a part humanoid, part canid creature. Canidae are a biological family of carnivores, more colloquially referred to as dogs. These include not only domestic pooches, but also wolves, coyotes, foxes, jackals, and a number of other similar mammals, as well as our intriguing new anomaly, SCP-6662. The main difference is that 6662 appears to be bipedal, walking on two legs much more like a human would, as opposed to four like its canid cousins. Its similarities with humans also include longer fingers, larger eyes, and more complex facial muscles that enable it to convey a wider range of facial expressions. It had a top-heavy build, its body seeming to be structured in such a way that would make it unbalanced. It's not even that the upper portion of its body is necessarily stronger, as SCP-6662's musculature doesn't even seem to function in the way one would expect a human being to, or a canid for that matter. It is entirely abnormally structured, with its muscles being simultaneously and paradoxically both lean and pronounced, yet also rounded and undefined. Despite possessing exaggerated masculine proportions, there is no indication that SCP-6662 is male or female. Testing by the SCP Foundation had revealed that its body doesn't produce any recognizable hormones, except for an extreme amount of insulin. Within humans, insulin is created in the pancreas and used to help convert glucose, or sugar, into energy. For the amount of insulin it appears to produce, it appears the inner workings of SCP-6662 are seemingly prepared to ingest high quantities of sugar. In terms of style, SCP-6662 has a consistent choice of outfit, consisting of a wide-brimmed fedora, a zipper jacket, and a backpack with a simple button flap. All of these are matching, made from brown leather that has been heavily weathered. SCP-6662 has never worn any legwear, but seems to not even understand the concept of why one would ever choose to put on a pair of pants in the first place. Apart from all of these traits, this anomaly's head, hands, feet, tail, and fur all resemble that of a Canis lupus, otherwise known as a Eurasian wolf, or the common wolf, native to much of Europe and Asia. However, the creature has exhibited a great deal of discomfort around mammals, and anything that isn't human seems to cause it to become increasingly confused. Does that make SCP-6662 the result of genetic experimentation? Is it some kind of hybrid between man and wolf? Or is it a werewolf? Well, it doesn't seem to be either of those, but instead something far more unusual. Ontokinetics. It's the clinical term given to reality warping, with ontokinesis referring to the anomalous ability to alter reality. This is an ability possessed by numerous SCPs that the Foundation has encountered over the years, and while some might use it to write human victims out of existence or otherwise generally wreak havoc, few deploy it in the same way as SCP-6662. SCP-6662 has exhibited the ability to manifest almost any variety of tools, bringing them into existence at will, usually by producing them from within its backpack. The things it can bring into being do not appear to function in the same way that you might expect an object from this reality to. For example, in one instance, SCP-6662 produced a handheld musical instrument from its backpack. While you might think this would be used to play a tune, this item actually unfolded into a fully operational tank at the push of a button. The gadgets it creates seems to have no logic that governs their function, with many being downright scientifically improbable. While any of these items appear to be operated through the simple use of brightly colored simplistic controls and buttons, SCP-6662's technology is far more complex than even the Foundation's top researchers can understand. Experts in the field, who have been examining anomalous devices for their entire careers, have been left stumped by studying the components of items SCP-6662 has created. Internally, each of these devices has a total lack of any coherent inner workings. They simply do not make sense, yet they carry out whatever function SCP-6662 intends. This has led many Foundation personnel to the working theory that each of the objects produced from its bag are solely operated by SCP-6662's subconscious. However, it only seems to be able to create tools that can fulfill immediate physical purposes, and cannot produce from its backpack anything that would satisfy its greater emotional needs and desires. As for what SCP-6662 actually needs or wants, well, it is a creature that has displayed an emotional and intellectual range that is almost as confusing as the inner workings of the devices it warps reality to create. Behavioral experts working at the SCP Foundation have noted that when it comes to its intelligence, it is hard to compare this wolf creature with any known level of human intellectual development. It's as inaccurate to liken it to a child as it would be to compare it to an average adult, primarily because SCP-6662 is profoundly unfamiliar with and unable to comprehend any fundamental aspects of our reality. It is able to acknowledge that it is not from our reality, but also unable to identify its own point of origin. In addition, it can perceive no difference between itself and human beings. Any of the differences that exist between humans and this bipedal canid creature are either imperceptible to it, or SCP-6662 considers them too negligible to even be worth acknowledging. However, one distinction that SCP-6662 does make is the difference between adults and children. SCP-6662 has complete trust for children and will even allow itself to be blatantly manipulated by them, believing anything they say. But in complete contrast, during its interactions with SCP Foundation personnel, the creature has shown itself to be highly distrustful of fully grown adults. Normally, when approached by one, it assumes that they are either angry or bored, even when Foundation staff have attempted to approach it with caution or have adopted positive mannerisms. The only proven strategy for interacting with it appears to be treating the canid creature with indifference. Otherwise, it will perceive adults as inherently confrontational. It lacks any and all awareness related to human development or familial structure, misidentifying every adult that it comes into contact with as a parent, regardless of whether they have children or not. Despite being at least aware of the difference between parents and children, even if it can't properly apply this knowledge to the people it meets, SCP-6662 doesn't think of itself as belonging to either of these social roles. Instead, in the rare occasions the SCP Foundation has been able to successfully conduct interviews with the anomaly, it has made references to an entirely different social binary that is separate from its understanding of parents and children. SCP-6662 has made reference to both keepers and seekers. When asked further questions about this by research personnel, probing the creature for more information on what exactly it thinks keepers and seekers are, SCP-6662 claimed that it was an example of a seeker, but the wolf-like entity either refused to or was unable to delineate the difference between what makes someone a keeper or a seeker. It has also not identified any other being from our reality as being either of these, and has been unable to explain more about the society or culture of whatever dimension or reality it originates from. Given that the anomaly closely resembles a wolf, you might be forgiven for assuming that being a seeker is akin to being an animal that hunts. Perhaps seekers and keepers are this creature's version of the hunter and gatherer categories we see in our own animal kingdom. Yet it does not seem to actively hunt for food, nor is SCP-6662 believed to be a carnivorous animal. Instead, apparently thanks to its anomalous reality warping abilities, the creature is able to sustain itself without any effort, seeming not to require food, water, or any other form of sustenance in order to survive. But then this begs the question, what exactly is SCP-6662 seeking? Almost all of SCP-6662's time and energy is spent searching for something it refers to as treasure treats. The creature has displayed an intense fixation with attempting to track down these treats, but in a rare example of it providing elaboration, SCP-6662 has shown itself to be willing to explain exactly what the phrase treasure treats refers to. In fact, the creature has provided such extensive description of these that they've even been given their own adjacent designation by the Foundation, SCP-6662-1. The so-called treasure treats are described by SCP-6662 to be an edible substance that the anomaly will go to any lengths to acquire, with the emphasis that it will do anything to obtain them. However, despite the detailed descriptions of SCP-6662-1 that have been provided to the SCP Foundation, any attempt to recreate these treasure treats or provide the creature with an existing alternative have been met with dissatisfaction and rejection by SCP-6662. There is one consistency, though. SCP-6662's descriptions of their coveted treasure treats will closely resemble the characteristics of breakfast cereal, in particular, sugary cereal. SCP-6662 has shown no interest in interacting with humans or any other living beings unless such an interaction is focused on obtaining SCP-6662-1. Whenever Foundation staff have attempted to engage with the canid creature, normally with a great deal of difficulty, the focus of conversation inevitably turns to acquiring SCP-6662-1. The anomaly will even go as far as attempting to coerce, bribe, or manipulate anyone engaging with it into assisting it in finding treasure treats. However, the creature is far from a master of manipulation and will always reveal its true intentions, given that it either lacks the developmental understanding to completely deceive a person or that it is so obsessed with finding SCP-6662-1, possibly even addicted to them, that it can't help but make its true intentions known. In order to observe the anomaly's behavior closely, one of the Foundation's mobile task forces was able to plant a bug within SCP-6662's backpack. This listening device revealed that the creature has a habit of vocalizing its own thoughts, often speaking aloud about its own feelings and actions at great length, when it believes that there is no one around to hear it. Within the transcript of the recordings recovered by the SCP Foundation, SCP-6662 can be heard lamenting how long its search has gone on. It expresses an unwillingness to see the stars, as night often brings with it feelings of doubt within the creature. It seems to have lost all sense of time and a self-defensive inability to think for too long about its own memories. SCP-6662's mind almost reflexively shuts out any thoughts of its own world as it starts to reminisce, bringing all its attention back to the present and its ongoing search for SCP-6662-1.
They're great! My instinct as a seeker is to press ever forward. Each fresh dawn is a call to a new day, a new adventure, a new breakfast. Just as no day can be relieved, no breakfast can be re-eaten, no matter how balanced it may be. There was a time when I would have said that life is but a journey from one breakfast to the next, but now I've explored the darkest jungles and braved the deepest tombs this world has to offer, but the only frosted oat doubloons that can be found are the pictures which yet ache in the back of my head.
The creature is tormented, seeking out something it can remember as being worth finding, yet unable to locate it no matter how long it continues to seek.
What good is a journey when the destination no longer exists? Why should I keep my eyes to the present when everything I see can only be found in the past?
According to its own words, SCP-6662 has spent years searching and yet feels as if that time has been wasted, as it has nothing to show for it. It even questions whether or not what it seeks can actually be found at all, yet it is unable to stop itself from searching day in and day out. Curiously, when alone, the creature makes reference to other beings that it has memories of, in particular, one named Samuel, presumably a bird, as he apparently possesses a beak. He also references someone named Horatio, who was apparently a seafaring captain, as well as an unnamed creature who dwelled in the treetops. SCP-6662 also speaks of a leprechaun, a great tiger, a group of sky elves, and an undead nobleman in a castle. From the way the anomaly describes these beings, they were rivals and possibly even fought in some kind of conflict together. Although the unnamed treetop being seems to have been an ally. And it seems that this particular being, possibly some kind of monkey, is the one SCP-6662 misses the most.
I would have gladly forfeit my remaining days of pineapple pearls, chocotastic treasure chests, and fruity fiesta gemstones. I would have made my destination the warmth of your gaze, and my purpose the pursuit of your smile. I would have followed you to the stars. I emerged from my cave, my burning heartache now tempered to a strange warmth. Questions of shame turn those to hope. If there are many worlds, could they share the same sky? If you can see me from where you are, I want you and your honey-coated constellations to gaze down at this weary dog with a smile. Whatever boundaries of space and time were broken for me to learn these lessons, I will break them again. I will snap every joint in the skeleton of reality between my bloody jaws until I am at your side in the cosmos.
So let's recap. We have a creature resembling a wolf with abnormal proportions that are almost closer to a caricature. This being can bend reality to produce any item it needs, whether or not said object even makes sense or conforms to our universe's rules of physics, almost like a cartoon. It also spends all of its time searching for sugary treasure treats, and the internal functions of its body appear to be primed to consume extreme amounts of glucose. If we take everything we know about this anomaly and put it all together, there is only one outcome. An answer so obvious and yet so outlandish that it remains the only applicable explanation for what this anomalous canid creature is. SCP-6662 is a breakfast cereal mascot.
There's an app for that. Wait, hold on! I'm Steve Jobs! Stop it!
It was a phrase so ubiquitous in the early days of the smartphone craze that it's hard to believe Apple actually has trademarked. It was a testament to a simple and immutable truth about the world these new touchscreen phones were creating. No matter how strange and obscure the need, there would be an app to fulfill it. Perhaps you remember iBeer, the app that allowed you to pretend you were drinking a tall glass of beer, for some reason. There was Car Matey, an app that reminded you where you parked your car, in a pirate voice. And who could forget I Am Bread, a surreal game about controlling a sentient slice of bread on a quest to become toast. But there's one app out there somewhere on the market that you probably didn't download. And if you did, well, you have our sincerest apologies. Because even seeing this video pop out onto your feed probably sent a chill down your spine. Well, if that chill ever even left. Take it from one gentleman whose life took a very strange turn after downloading a certain app that the SCP Foundation calls SCP-1471. Because the sentiment, "there's an app for that," doesn't exclude experiencing mortal terror. Joe Lillis, an insurance salesman from Milwaukee, had just gone through another atrocious date. After a mediocre meal and an uncomfortable 35 minutes of inane babble, sensing the whole time that she really wasn't that interested, his date excused himself to take a quick phone call outside. Sadly for Joe, she never returned, leaving him to pick up the check. Of all the many words you could use to describe poor Joe Lillis, the most pertinent would be lonely. Ever since Carol, his wife of 10 years, had passed away in a freak accident, he'd been trying to find some kind of way to fill the void. They'd been high school sweethearts, intent on spending the rest of their lives with one another. As fate would have it, only Carol would get that tainted luxury. Joe would be forced to endure life after the joy of living had run its course. He only hoped he might be lucky enough to find love again. However, Joe was on the wrong side of 40, and as so many others his age were already hitched, he could feel his options going out one by one. Would he be destined to live out the rest of his days alone? Joe didn't feel like spending the back half of his life catching reruns of Seinfeld and tending to his fish. He needed to get out there. And thankfully, like the rest of us, he lived in the internet age. He had more apps, websites, online services, and hot Russian singles in his area than he knew what to do with. So surely one would have the right person for him. He tried them all: Tinder, Hinge, Match.com, Plenty of Fish, eHarmony, Bumble, Zoosk, OkCupid, Friend Finder, Deeply Lonely Singles with Low Expectations.com, and so much more. However, all it seemed to achieve was setting him up for more disappointment. None of the dates he'd managed to get ever resulted in anything getting serious. Heck, it was a minor miracle if he even managed to get any of them on a second date. Was this it? Was this his life now? Had he only ever gotten one shot at love, and the grasping claws of fate yanked it away from him without a second thought? Would life continue on the hamster wheel of loneliness? Sleeping, getting up, eating, working, and sleeping again? Every day getting somehow both faster and slower as life trudged on to a disappointing yet inevitable conclusion? What a terrible fate to find yourself trapped in. Whenever Joe started feeling maudlin like this, he knew it was time to get proactive again. Maybe the right woman was out there. There were billions of them, after all. Surely at least one of them would be the perfect person for him. He just needed the perfect app. He'd burned through all of the most reputable apps already, and was now perusing some of the slightly seedier options, most of which were likely data mining fronts from the Balkans. However, as generic app after generic app passed, something different caught his eye. The icon was a smiling cartoon dog, and its name was MalO version 1.0.0. This gave him a little chuckle. At the very least, it was very different branding from the rest of the dating apps he'd seen. Maybe it had just been sorted into the wrong section of the App Store. He decided he'd check it out and take a look at the app's description. The description read, "Never settle for those awkward feelings of being alone ever again. MalO is an exciting and interactive experience that will keep you engaged and intrigued. The anxiety of social situations can be nerve-wracking, but after just a few hours of MalO, you will soon forget all about those painful emotions of disappointment. Be part of the new craze that is quickly becoming the next social substitute. Remember, the more you participate, the more MalO will engage you. Your experience is completely up to you. Absolutely no ads. Enjoy." Well, it certainly provoked Joe's curiosity at the very least. He did want to banish his feelings of loneliness, and seeing as the app was free and apparently had no ads, he'd surely be foolish to not at least give it a whirl. What's the worst that could happen? He began the installation, and only then noticed that the app had no listed developer. It took up 9.8 megabytes of memory, which he wasn't tech-savvy enough to see any issues with. More than anything, Joe was just enticed by the prospect of finally having another chance at companionship with MalO. After all, it is the next social substitute, whatever that means. However, Joe's excitement was quickly quashed when he hit the home screen button and noticed that the icon for the app never actually materialized. Strange. He checked the App Store portal again and saw that, according to them, the app had completely downloaded. What gives? Was it a glitch, or was MalO actually just malware? Either way, he was disheartened by the fact that this immaterial app certainly wouldn't be getting him any companionship. Or so he thought, anyway. Joe was used to disappointment by now, so he didn't take it too personally. He decided to just play out the rest of his evening on autopilot, making himself some soup, doing the laundry, watching more Seinfeld reruns, taking a cold shower, and preparing to cry himself to sleep again. MalO was already becoming a distant memory, just like all the deceptive sources of hope. But one strange thing happened that disrupted Joe's finely tuned evening routine. He received a text message. This was incredibly strange because nobody ever seemed to text him. The last text he got was from Carol just before her accident, so it was almost surreal to hear that alert sound now, after everything that happened. He checked and saw that the text was an image attachment sent from an unknown number. Perplexed yet curious, he decided to open it. His curiosity soon gave way to a kind of melancholy nostalgia when he saw that the photo was of his and Carol's favorite cafe in town. They'd spent many a morning there, back when she was alive, treating themselves to a nice cup of coffee and perhaps a croissant. Just seeing it again caused an involuntary smile to spread across his face. It never even occurred to him, as it probably would have to others, that this could be seen as a little creepy. He hadn't frequented the bakery since Carol died, How would anyone even know that this place held any significance for him? Was it a stalker, a ghost, or just a spooky coincidence? None of these thoughts even crossed Joe's mind. He was just grateful for the surprising reminder of the happiness he'd once had. For the next couple hours, things seemed lighter. He went about his evening, checking the photo every so often and smiling, until eventually he found himself in bed, still looking into the glow of his phone. It was such a beautiful little cafe. Then he froze. He noticed something in the picture. It'd been there the whole time, but only now he was seeing rather than just looking. It was in the corner, staring through the glass of the cafe's door. So faint he almost wanted to dismiss it as a trick of the light. It was a face. Well, not a face, more like a skull. Not a human, not anywhere near human. Long, slender, and canine, with protruding fangs and vacant white eyes. The pure white of the skull was buried in a nest of thick black hair. It looked like it was crouching behind the door, looking out and grinning, whatever the hell it was. Just seeing it changed the entire tone of the picture. It was no longer a simple reminder of bygone joy. Now all that was radiating out of that image was a palpable sense of dread. Was someone playing some kind of awful prank on him? Just then he was jogged from his contemplation by another alert. A new message from the same number as before. With great hesitation, he hovered his thumb over the push notification and clicked. That's when everything got a lot worse. It was a photo of a bus stop. Not just any bus stop, of course. It was stop C16, the one that Joe always took to get to work. It looked like it was taken relatively early in the morning, but nobody was there. Well, not quite nobody. There was that figure again. It stood at full height, behind the partially frosted glass that makes up the back of the bus stop. The same large black humanoid shape, with a white, grinning dog skull where the face should be. Something about it terrified him on such a primal level, like the way our lizard brain reacts to some ancient apex predator. And whatever this thing was, it clearly knew something about him. How else could it stage all these photos? Joe got out of bed and looked out of the window, down onto his dark front street. Empty, thankfully. But after this surprise nightmare, he wasn't going to take any chances. He grabbed a kitchen knife from downstairs and placed it on his bedside cabinet, right next to his phone, with 911 on speed dial. Joe Lillis, a 43-year-old man, slept with the lights on that night for the first time in over 30 years. Sadly for him, the nightmare was just beginning. The next morning, Joe woke up unharmed, but he wasn't pleased to see that he'd gotten several more texts in his sleep. There was one taken outside of the local insurance company office where he worked. The strange creature with the skull for a face was looming around the corner, peering at the camera with its lipless grin, like it was mocking him. Another photo was taken at the local supermarket where Joe did most of his grocery shopping. The frame was centralized on the cereal aisle, bordered on both sides by walls of garish mascots endlessly repeated. Down at the far end of the aisle was a looming dark figure with that cold canine skull where a human face should be. There were a few more, but worst of all was the last one. It was taken at the cemetery. In the foreground, a headstone reading, "Carol Lillis, beloved wife and daughter." Joe was horrified to see that skull-faced beast was rising up behind his wife's grave, long clawed fingers curling around the top of the headstone. That was the moment that Joe decided to go to the police about all of this, before things got even more out of hand. He called an Uber to get down to the station. He certainly didn't feel like he was going anywhere near his regular bus stop after last night. He showed the photos he'd been sent so far to an officer posted at the station, and they agreed that there was certainly something strange about it. While the behavior undeniably bordered on harassment, it hadn't yet delved into criminal territory, so he would sadly be on his own until then. The best they could do was stay in touch and kept abreast of any new developments. The only sage advice they could give him was not to delete the photos, as they could always be used as evidence in court later if things escalated. This was literally the last result that Joe wanted out of this. Considering how bizarre and threatening things were getting already, he really didn't want to find out what escalation looked like in this case. But what else could he do but carry on, just trying to exercise as much caution as he could, in these strange new circumstances. He went to work and tried his best to stay productive, despite the fact that every 3 or so hours, a new photo would arrive. Places that he liked to sit in the local parks, stores he'd frequent, restaurants he liked to eat at. The nightmare skeleton dog thing would be standing in all of them, just mugging for the camera. On one hand, every time he looked at one of the photos, Joe felt like he was giving this freak exactly what they wanted. On the other hand, how could he possibly look away? What if he missed something that could save his life? It carried on much like that until later in the evening. Joe may have not been a genius, but he was no fool either. He'd seen too many of those seedy true crime documentaries about kidnapping to take his normal route home. He took a real detour, frequently checking over his shoulder the entire time. Much to his relief, he didn't see anything out of place. Good. When he got home, he locked every door and bolted every window. Nothing would be getting the jump on him tonight. That's when the next picture came in. A photograph of Joe's empty office cubicle, with the bony face of the creature looming over the divider with a grin. He could feel his heart pounding away in his chest just looking at it. How did this thing get around like this? How was it able to infiltrate everywhere in his entire goddamn life? Suddenly, he felt a smile spreading across his face. This freak had just messed up big time. Before, all these creepy photos had been taken in public places, but the one taken in his office? Oh, this crossed the line into trespassing. The police would have to do something about it now. It had given him an ace up his sleeve. That confidence faded a few hours later when he received another photo. This time, it was the skull-faced monster just standing on the sidewalk. The sidewalk that Joe remembered walking on his covert alternative route. He could feel himself break into a cold sweat. It seemed whoever this was, he really did hold no secrets from them. Now more than ever, Joe didn't feel safe in his own home. So you can only imagine how he felt when a few hours later, he received a photo of the skull-faced stalker standing right outside his own front door, staring into the camera. It sent him rushing to the window again to check outside, but of course, nobody was there. The next day, when he called the police and updated them on the situation, they told him that they were doing all they could. The best thing he could possibly do was to remain calm, but vigilant. He needed to keep an eye on the photos being sent to him, so he could notify them if ever he was in any immediate danger. This put poor Joe's paranoia at a fever pitch. Even when he went to work, surrounded by his coworkers, by witnesses, he could scarcely tear his eyes away from his phone. He was a slave to the photos, forever waiting for the next one, only to experience crushing regret when the photo actually arrived. It looked like it was taken moments before it was sent to him. Joe saw himself looking at his own phone in his office cubicle, with that huge skull-faced figure looming behind him. He screamed out loud upon seeing it, and turned to see if anything was behind him. But of course, there was nothing there. The police inspected the office, talked to potential witnesses, and analyzed the photo. It showed no signs of any photographic manipulation, but there were also no witnesses around the office who claimed to see anything strange that day. There was also no security camera footage in the last several days that showed this figure coming in or out. Joe Lillis started to feel like he was going insane, and perhaps he was. But that didn't change the tangible and ever-present feeling that he was in great danger. He didn't come into work the next day. He'd received more photos like that in the night, of himself, taken in real time, with that skull-faced freak looming. He didn't want to leave the house. He didn't want to go anywhere anymore. He just didn't feel safe out there. How could he, with all this madness unfolding? There was a time where he could have said something like, "At least it only seems confined to my phone." He might have even suspected that it had something to do with that strange MalO app he downloaded a few days prior that hadn't seemed to do anything. But this situation had evolved since then. He wasn't just seeing the creature in photos anymore. It was here. He kept seeing quick flashes of it on the other side of windows, in reflections, in the corner of his eyes, always darting away if ever he turned towards it. It was everywhere and nowhere. It was here just for him. He just knew. The police couldn't help. Nobody could help. Joe just sat in the corner of his bedroom, clutching his kitchen knife, afraid to close his eyes. It could be anywhere. It could be anywhere. It could be anywhere. We know one thing for sure. Joe Lillis never felt truly alone ever again. He always had his new friend, waiting, just out of sight. And if ever you're feeling lonesome and decide to download MalO version 1.0.0 yourself, then you'll never feel lonely again, either.
Dr. Gears was having another boring day at the SCP Foundation, and that was exactly how he liked it. He treated himself to a cup of decaf black coffee, no cream, no sugar, a simple plain donut, and an apple. The breakfast of champions, to him at least. His duties today were ones he'd overseen so many times before, watching his ever-rotating legion of subordinates shove various items into SCP-914 the Clockworks, just to see what on earth would happen. This machine had the ability to transmute matter in a variety of fashions, depending on the input selection, whether rough, coarse, one-to-one, fine, or even very fine. They tested everything, from Dr. Gears' watch to a chimp, which, as we all know, resulted in the beloved hyper-intelligent chimp scientist, Dr. Bobo. There were in fact such extensive testing records for SCP-914 that Dr. Gears had started taking an uncharacteristic hands-off approach to testing, as long as the researchers working under him were reasonably sure that the results of their testing wouldn't result in a containment breach, a fundamental alteration of consensus reality, or some massive loss of life. They could just go ahead with whatever dumb little experiment their heart desired. This, however, would turn out to be a way longer leash than Dr. Gears ever should have given to the kind of weirdos who work at the SCP Foundation. There had been certain, let's say, incidents in the past that have proved members of the SCP Foundation aren't above using anomalies inappropriately for their own personal enjoyment. There was, of course, the incident with SCP-6662, the butler's handbell, and the supernatural butler it summons, Mr. Deeds. During the early stages of testing, Dr. Mirth, under the guise of experimentation, made Mr. Deeds make him tea, wash his car, cut his hair, and even do his laundry. Dr. Mirth was given a stern talking to by the O5 Council for this abuse of power. Good job, O5 Council. It's not like you ever use anomalies for your own benefit. Let's move on. Nothing to see here, folks. Speaking of people working for the Foundation using anomalies inappropriately, who could forget the extremely uncomfortable incident involving SCP-137, a real toy? This anomaly has the ability to become a real-life version of any toy brought into its vicinity, from the Masters of the Universe to Barbie in her dream house. But one researcher was hiding a horrifying secret. He was a brony. And that's why he sneaked a Twilight Sparkle toy into the testing chamber so he could have a conversation with his favorite My Little Pony character, which all in attendance agreed just had incredibly rancid vibes through and through. And that brings us back to today. Dr. Gears deciding to let his subordinate researchers throw pretty much anything into the Clockworks as long as it was unlikely to cause physical harm. And leaving this metaphorical door open allowed people like Dr. Siegel to step through. You see, while Dr. Siegel was considered by most to be an incredibly diligent and hardworking junior researcher, he did have one vice in his downtime. He was a card-carrying furry. And we're not just talking about a guy who watched Disney's Zootopia a few too many times. He had his own fursona. A wolf, if you were curious. I personally wasn't. He attended cons for fellow furries semi-frequently, and even had his own expensive, custom, high-end fursuit. As such, there was one SCP he found particularly interesting, SCP-1471, also known as MalO version 1.0.0, an anomalous mobile app with some extremely strange properties. If you access it on an app store of your choice, you'll encounter an image of a strange, skull-headed canine creature with the following iconic description. MalO version 1.0.0 free. Reviews 0. Description: never settle for those awkward feelings of being alone ever again. MalO is an exciting and interactive experience that will keep you engaged and intrigued. The anxiety of social situations can be nerve-wracking, but after just a few hours of MalO, you will soon forget all about those painful emotions of disappointment. Be part of the new craze that is so quickly becoming the next social substitute. Remember, the more you participate, the more MalO will engage you. Your experience is completely up to you. Absolutely no ads. Enjoy. Dr. Siegel was certainly eager to forget all his painful emotions of disappointment and embrace the new social substitute. But he'd read all the documents and seen all the pictures on the file. Those who download the MalO app will be texted a series of photos, becoming closer to home over time, both literally and figuratively, which show the strange creature known as MalO getting closer and closer. For some, this would be a complete nightmare. For those inclined in the direction of Dr. Siegel, it would be a dream come true. There was only one issue. They were just pictures. But Dr. Siegel didn't get a job at the SCP Foundation by having a lack of intelligence. He'd very quickly figured out a potential solution to the digital barrier between him and his canine crush. He'd buy a burner phone, download the MalO app onto it, and put the resulting infected device directly into the clockworks. It was one of the best ideas he'd ever had, in his own humble opinion. But of course, it would all be about selecting the right setting. On rough, the most likely result would be the phone itself just being transformed into a pile of broken glass, metal, and a variety of conflict minerals reduced to dust. On course, the result would likely be the metal chassis of the phone, the front glass panel, and a neatly arranged interior gutted from within. On one-to-one, considering he'd bought a slightly older, cheaper model of Samsung's smartphone, he'd probably get the MalO app on an iPhone. And on fine, perhaps the best he could hope for was getting MalO version 2.0.0, which may have some minor improvement, like the pictures appearing twice as fast as they would with the normal app experience. Dr. Siegel knew that the only other option that could potentially bring MalO into the real world was the highly unpredictable, very fine option, which would either produce the desired result or cause something utterly horrifying to happen. But at the end of the day, Dr. Siegel thought to himself, isn't anything worth having also worth incurring a little risk? Who dares wins, after all, right? He downloaded the fateful app and made his way into the testing area for SCP-914. He'd booked the slot, so it was all official, but he still felt his heart racing as he put the infected phone into the input chamber. He set the control panel to very fine, exactly as planned, and activated the machine. Cogs twisted and churned, engines rumbled and sputtered, pipes wriggled and hissed. It was clear that something was going on here. When the process was complete and the output chamber opened with a billowing carpet of steam, Dr. Siegel could barely contain his excitement. He hoped that MalO would come strolling out of the smoke like Darth Vader in Star Wars: A New Hope, so you can only imagine his extreme disappointment when the chamber was completely empty. It didn't make sense. He thought everything through. How could the result possibly be so anticlimactic? This had gone from one of the most exciting days of his life to the most depressing. Dr. Siegel sighed and decided to call it quits, heading out of the test chamber, having no idea what he'd just unleashed onto the Foundation. Across the site, Dr. Alto Clef, one of the Foundation's most infamous researchers, was polishing his favorite shotgun in his office. He was whistling a cheerful tune to himself, just loving life, when he heard some strange rustling by the door. He turned around on his swivel chair just to make sure it wasn't Dr. Bright putting another bucket of battery acid on top of his door as a, quote, fun, harmless prank. Instead, he was shocked to see MalO, an actual, physical MalO, standing in his doorway, grinning. For a moment, Clef was too shocked to even react. This didn't make any kind of sense, but when MalO gave him a cheeky wink, he immediately loaded his shotgun and fired, blowing away a chunk of his own doorway. But sadly for him, by that time, MalO had already darted away, intent on causing mischief elsewhere. Its favorite pastime. Dr. Clef was still wondering whether that rascal Dr. Bright was somehow behind this fiasco. But he was not, because he was actually about to become MalO's next victim in its ruthless reign of mild to moderate inconvenience. Dr. Bright was swanning around the break room with his favorite morning snack, a coffee with extra cream and a Danish from his favorite bakery in town. He was looking forward to enjoying these two simple pleasures in his otherwise incredibly stressful life, but little did the poor doctor know, tragedy was about to strike, and nothing would ever be the same. Just as the immortal doctor was about to disembark from the room, MalO appeared right in front of him, giving him the mild shock of his life. It was such a surprising occurrence, in fact, that he momentarily lost his grip on his coffee mug and his Danish, causing both to tumble to the ground. The mug shattered and the Danish splattered. By the time Dr. Bright looked up, MalO was already gone, just like his breakfast snack. Dr. Bright fell to his knees and screamed, "Why?" up to an indifferent break room ceiling. But MalO was just getting started. Dr. Kane Pathos Crow was on his way from his kennel, we mean his private quarters, to the soul extractor, when MalO suddenly manifested in front of him. This resulted in a brief barking match between the two for dominance over that particular hallway, which ended in MalO demanifesting to bother someone else, which technically made Dr. Crow the winner, though Crow himself resented ever being forced to act like a mere mutt. How, he began to wonder, had MalO escaped its app and begun to harass the real world? This would warrant further investigation. MalO continued its rampage of irritation across the site, intended to leave no stone of frustration unturned. And it wasn't just the Foundation staff it intended to freak out. It was just as eager to go and bother its fellow anomalies now that it had access to the meat space. Yes, that is a real term, we're not just being weird and gross, we promise. Over in the cell of SCP-173, the sculpture, 3 members of D-Class personnel were cleaning up the homicidal creature's blood and poop. They were engaged in the standard procedure. One of them mopped, while the other 2 kept a close eye on SCP-173 to keep it frozen in place. That's when MalO popped into the cell behind them for a split second before disappearing, scaring the living hell out of all 3 of them. Though the fright was, of course, secondary to the fact that the second they looked away, SCP-173 snapped all 3 of their necks. Oops. May have gone a little too far on that one, eh, MalO? But this newly embodied burdensome beast was just getting started, friends. No anomaly was safe from its new antics. Next, it appeared in front of SCP-682's acid tank and made rude faces at the hateful creature from the other side of the glass. This only served to sour the creature's already utterly horrific mood. It thrashed around in the chamber, attempting to get out and perform an act of great violence. But by that time, MalO was already long gone, and SCP-682 was left grumbling in immense frustration. SCP-049, the Plague Doctor, was having another very boring day. He'd been denied his animal cadaver test subjects for several days as a disciplinary measure after the latest incident, and as such, he was finding other ways to pass the time. Today, he was meticulously removing each piece of medical equipment, polishing them, and putting them in a neat line on his desk in his containment chamber. Scalpels, forceps, speculums, bone saws, all wonderful, shiny, and pristine. The Plague Doctor found it to be an incredibly calming activity, so, of course, MalO couldn't just let him be. The cantankerous canine, driven mad by the power of suddenly being able to interact with the world physically, manifested in the middle of the containment chamber and used its tail to knock all the meticulously arranged medical equipment onto the ground with a thunderous clatter. The Plague Doctor, devastated, lifted both of his hands to his beak and yelled, "Sacre bleu!" in horror. In that same instant, MalO once again disappeared, leaving the tragic doctor to start from scratch. It was a serious setback on an otherwise lovely day. "Curse you, strange dog creature," he thought to himself while bending over to pick up the pieces. "Curse you and your entire bloodline." A group of hardcore Mobile Task Force members was engaged in the comically manly activity of playing poker while smoking in the barracks. And before you judge them for that, remember that if your job was as stressful as being a member of a Mobile Task Force, you'd probably smoke too. But their job was about to get a little more stressful when MalO suddenly materialized and gave the poker table a sharp kick, sending the towers of poker chips and decks of cards all over the place, before disappearing without a trace yet again. It completely ruined their game. One of the more junior members asked, "Should we have done something about that?" A more senior operative shook his head and said, "We'll do something when we get the official call from up top. Until then, let's reshuffle the deck." In the Site-19 cafeteria, Dr. Agatha Wrights was preparing to eat a delicious salad that she'd been waiting all day to enjoy. As we've often established, working at the SCP Foundation can be an immensely stressful job, so you need to take the small joys where you can get them. For Dr. Wrights, this delicious premium salad that she'd bought from Harris Teeter earlier in that day was indeed a joy. She even got a fancy vinaigrette dressing for the occasion. Before she took the first bite, she noticed SCP-073 Kane approaching. Dr. Wright smiled and gave him a polite nod. Kane waved back. That, our dear viewers, is when tragedy struck. MalO suddenly manifested in front of Kane, propping out one of its canid legs right in front of where the hapless anomaly was walking. By the time Kane began to trip and fall over, MalO had already vanished, but it was too late. Kane kept falling forward until one of his metal hands landed right into the bowl that contained Dr. Wright's salad. Due to his anomalous abilities, the salad immediately withered away into nasty, dead nothingness. Dr. Wright began to cry as Kane, who felt profoundly guilty, tried his best to apologize. Truly, nobody in Site-19 was safe. MalO popped up behind Iris and ruined all of her photos. MalO popped up behind the immortal Hitler clone in his cell and gave him a good kick in the rear. MalO even popped up right behind SCP-343, also known as God, who smugly replied,
I knew you were going to do that, my son.
Needless to say, it had been one hell of a day. Dr. Siegel, completely ignorant to the chaos his actions had caused around the site, had cried in the bathroom for 40 minutes out of sheer disappointment. He'd barely been able to focus on the rest of his duties for the day on account of being severely bummed out. This was a day he'd been looking forward to for so long, and it all had been for nothing. That evening, he was driving home on the highway, listening to sad songs on the radio, thinking about the fact he'd probably just crack open a beer and get some sleep when he got home. He sighed again and looked up to adjust his rearview mirror when he saw a skeletal face with huge white eyes staring at him in the reflection. A quick, almost reflexive turn revealed a huge black figure with a canine skull for a face was indeed just sitting in his back seat, watching him. It was so shocking that he immediately veered off the road and crashed his car into the concrete divider in the middle of the road, breaking his nose and collarbone in the process. Really a perfect cherry on top for this kind of day. Dr. Siegel was sitting in the hospital not long after that, with a cast around his upper body. This was also where he received a bouquet of flowers from Dr. Gears with an attached note saying he was put on 3-month disciplinary leave for the irresponsible use of SCP-914. Dr. Siegel looked up and saw that MalO was peering around the corner at him with its dead white eyes, its fang-lined maw twisted into a permanent, ominous grin. At this point, Dr. Siegel realized that being chased around constantly by a demonic skull-faced anomaly in real life wasn't nearly as whimsical as he expected it would be. In hindsight, that probably should have been obvious, shouldn't it? Though, please, let us know if you'd like MalO to stalk you in real life in the comments below, you bunch of weirdos. Technology. A double-edged sword of our own making that can provide both ultimate convenience and the threat of a grim future ruled by unfeeling machines. Well, maybe the stakes aren't that high yet, but our over-reliance on technology can have some terrible consequences. The number of traffic accidents continues to increase year by year, as our main mode of overland transportation also puts us in harm's way for longer and longer portions of our day. The internet can allow us to access any information we may desire, but it can spread misinformation twice as fast. And what about video games? An interactive artistic medium that can provide simulated experiences so vivid that many of us can eventually lose interest in our real lives. What starts off as a fun indulgence in our favorite hobby can quickly spiral into an obsession. The risks and rewards of virtual space are satisfyingly predictable compared to the chaos of modern living, and sometimes we just can't stop ourselves from striving for a few more easy wins. Minutes, hours, and even days can go by without any apparent activity on our side of the screen, and yet the world of the video game has changed drastically due to our actions. But at a certain point, that initial rush of dopamine wears off, and you find that you need a much greater challenge in order to feel any sense of accomplishment. So you choose to pick up some harder video games, and you grind away until you can complete them just as easily. But that's not enough either. Surely there must be even tougher games out there. Games that will never go easy on you. Games that won't allow you to make even a single mistake. Games that make you proud of the frankly inexcusable amount of hours of your life that you've spent sitting in the dark, clutching a controller, squinting at your screen. You need a game that can do all of that and more. And because you've effectively given up your chances at ever being a social butterfly, you could also use something to help you mitigate the overwhelming loneliness that now constantly defines your everyday life. Well, worry no longer, you weary, downtrodden gamer you, because here at the SCP Foundation, we've cooked up a one-of-a-kind mod that is sure to redefine your gaming experience. If this doesn't turn out to be the game of the year, I don't know what could be. Among Us 2, maybe? The latest in a long line of Last of Us remakes? What about Half-Life 3? I digress. Introducing the Foundation's brand new killer app. The cutting-edge tactical heuristic algorithms of SCP-1633 combined with the 24/7 companionship of SCP-1471 MalO. I can tell by your expression that you're already eager for a playtest, but slow down, we need to catch all the normies out there up to speed. Let's start with the digital canine companion that is all the rage, SCP-1471, or should I say MalO version 1.0.0, a Euclid-class SCP object which comes in the form of a free downloadable app for your smartphone. There has never been any reviews of this app for as long as it has existed, but honestly, are you really going to trust the words of a bunch of crooked reviewers when you could find out for yourself? Words to live by: don't trust anyone who isn't part of your precious gaming hobby. The description of MalO version 1.0.0 reads, "Never settle for those awkward feelings of being alone ever again. MalO is an exciting and interactive experience that will keep you engaged and intrigued. The anxiety of social situations can be nerve-wracking, but just after a few hours of MalO, you will soon forget all about those painful emotions of disappointment. Be part of the new craze that is quickly becoming the next social substitute. Remember, the more you participate, the more MalO will engage you. Your experience is completely up to you. Absolutely no ads. Enjoy." The app has never received an update, but that's because SCP-1471 has been a completely functional experience since its release. All one needs to do is download the app, and within a matter of hours, MalO version 1.0.0 will begin to send the user photographs of familiar locations. These can include photographs of the user's work, home, or public places they often frequent, such as cafes and nightclubs. In the case of you, a complete shut-in gamer, these photographs would probably be limited to the interior of your favorite gaming room. When was the last time you cleaned up those pizza boxes? Regardless of where the images were apparently taken, each one will contain a canine humanoid with a skull for a face. Say hello to your new best friend, MalO, or SCP-1471-A if we're using the approved designation. MalO's app will continue to send you photographs for as long as you have it installed. And because there is no way to uninstall it, no matter how hard you try, you'll be getting intimately close to home selfies for the rest of your days. Doesn't it feel so good to have such a loyal friend as MalO? Of course, there's only so much you can gain from photographs alone. You're a gamer, damn it, and what you want is interactivity. But don't worry about that part. We've got you more than covered with SCP-1633, which may in fact be the most challenging video game ever programmed by mortal hands. Hell, it even gives many games programmed by anomalous hands a run for their money. While it was never released to the market and doesn't even have a working title, the steampunk adventure that awaits you within SCP-1633 is bolstered by highly sophisticated tactical heuristic algorithms. In this third-person squad-based action RPG, you can switch between 4 playable characters: the Marksman, who specializes in long-range weaponry; the Alchemist, with potions and chemicals to control the battlefield; the Rogue, a stealth-oriented character who catches enemies unaware and assassinates them; and of course, the Thug, a tough-as-nails melee combatant with increased health and durability. It doesn't really matter who you choose, because most playthroughs of SCP-1633 always end the same way. That being said, your hand-eye coordination and reflexes are second to none, and they also are quite possibly your best qualities. Let's set you up with the Marksman as your main character, since all those shooters you've played will definitely help your aim. And trust me, you're going to need it. The story mode of SCP-1633 will put you up against a slew of Victorian-era rascals and miscreants, all of which are pulled straight from the Penny Dreadfuls. There's even some classic fantasy races mixed in from the works from good old Professor Tolkien himself. Dwarves, elves, goblins, the works. It's a little generic, but why worry about the story when the gameplay is what will really get you hooked? There's a final boss at the end of the game known as the Krathnar, trying to destroy the entire world. You need to stop it. You know, the usual RPG storyline. You've stopped dozens of ancient entities, demon lords, corrupt godlings, and unspeakable calamities in your time. This Krathnar will be one more for the record books. Par for the course. Are you ready, Player 1? You'll be dropped straight into the marksman's shoes, fighting for him and your life against Krathnar's hordes of henchmen. But you won't be doing it alone. After all, you've got the rest of your squad and a mysterious companion whose true intentions will reveal themselves in due time. We did say we modded the game after all. So, let's play. Your first 2 hours won't be anything to write home about. Not that you ever leave home these days. The AI of SCP-1633 will seem to be barely functioning, a buggy mess where enemies only charge in a straight line towards your character. Your marksman will be easily able to take them down in a hailstorm of projectiles. At 3 hours in, things start getting a bit more interesting, as the tactical heuristic algorithms kick in. The enemies that hold long-range weapons will shoot at you from a distance, while the close-range ones will move toward you in a serpentine pattern before attacking in melee. This is more like it. Not the most challenging, but the game is clearly increasing in difficulty. You also think you see a dark figure with a skull for a face lurking around corners and following your squad. But with all the glitches, it's hard to tell if this is an intentional part of the game or not. At 5 hours, enemies that showed limited signs of strategy are now using cover effectively, and will attack with alchemical splash weapons such as grenades to deal damage to your ranged characters and lure your squad into melee range. They still aren't that much of a challenge, but the fact that they now exhibit a clear self-preservation instinct means that they are fighting to win. This is also when your help officially arrives. You're in the middle of a shootout when you see an enemy about to throw another one of those frustrating splash weapons. You duck behind your cover and prepare to take a hit when suddenly the grenade is snatched out of the enemy's hand and tossed in the opposite direction to explode harmlessly. This is the work of SCP-1471-A, who has now arrived in the game world as an NPC ally. For the next several hours of gameplay, MalO continues to provide interference by preventing any splash weapons from being thrown. It'll sneak up on enemies and take their weapons, disrupt their cover by pushing movable boxes and trash cans out of the way, and even catch the splash weapons in her mouth like a dog would catch frisbees before chucking them away. While it never directly deals damage to the enemies, its mischievous antics are very efficient at protecting you from harm. As luck would have it, the enemies can't seem to interact with MalO, and are baffled as this invisible force continues to throw off their strategies. MalO will use this to its advantage, as well as yours, by appearing at enemy ambush points and using sign language to communicate warnings to you as the player. Having MalO around starts to feel a little bit like cheating, but keep in mind the game is starting to adapt to your skill level and will soon begin to employ advanced strategies to mess with you. All the MalO mod does is even the playing field. Krathnar is still running rampant in the world of SCP-1633, and it's going to take your entire squad of steampunk heroes and a lonely man's best friend, MalO, to stop this big bad evil guy. The final boss will possess the highest level of intelligence that the algorithms are capable of, and it'll make that known to you the second you step into the arena. For the majority of your gameplay, the enemies have focused on countering the marksman, since you've relied on that character's ranged weapon style. But they've come to realize that you're too much of a pro MLG gigachad to ever lose a fair encounter. So Krathnar does the unthinkable and targets the alchemist, rogue, and thug first. It throws all of its most powerful attacks at the members of your squad you aren't controlling, forcing you to waste resources in order to keep them alive or switch to them in order to dodge fatal blows. Whenever you aren't in command of the marksman, Krathnar will strike the character with a strong melee attack that forces you to take control back. MalO is still unable or unwilling to deal damage to the boss, so it very much seems like you are on your own. Your squad is in shambles, your focus is starting to wane. After all that you've been thrown in this gaming challenge, it might be the final boss that makes you throw in the towel. Then, a dialogue box appears. It's from MalO. Don't give up hope, user. I've had so much fun playing with you, and I know that you have what it takes. You never needed a friend before me, and you can win against Krafnar just like you've won against every other final boss you've ever faced. You've got this, buddy. Your best friend, MalO. It felt overly sentimental, but something about this message fills you with the determination to keep going. You call upon all your gaming knowledge, all of your skill, all of your passion, and with pinpoint precision, you guide your squad to defeat Krafnar in record-breaking time. You sit back in your gaming chair, exhilarated and finally satisfied. This truly was the ultimate gaming experience, and all you needed was a little help from your friend. The year was 2015. Lewis, Joseph, and Sydney were like a lot of kids their age, which is to say 11 years old. They secretly stay up past their bedtime watching scary videos on the internet when their moms and dads think they're sleeping. They go to school every day and daydream about all the fun things they're going to do when that school bell finally rings at the end of the day. And of course, they play a lot, and we mean a lot, of Minecraft. Whenever they're not at school, hanging out at the local park and filming goofy TikTok videos, or watching those aforementioned scary videos on the internet, there's a good chance that they'll be online together, logging a few extra hours building bases, digging big holes, or playing survival mode, and seeing how long they can last against the onslaught of mobs. But there's one particular pursuit they have while playing Minecraft together that takes up the majority of their playtime. One quixotic quest that drives them forward, despite all the naysayers and doubters, tracking down and finding the legendary Minecraft creepypasta entity, Herobrine. For those who weren't around on the internet back then, creepypastas like Herobrine were all the rage. Like any video game, the new frontier of Minecraft with all of its procedurally generated landscapes felt like it held new mysteries. And mysteries are equal parts exciting and frightening. After all, who really knows what's going on behind a closed door? Herobrine was a Minecraft-specific little urban legend. Stories told of a default Minecraft skin with eerily white eyes manifesting in the game, even in solo matches, and terrorizing players. One internet sleuth who looked into the mystery of Herobrine claimed it to be the haunted soul of the dead brother of Minecraft's creator, Marcus Persson, also known as Notch. In the years since the legend first started, Notch himself has come forward and disavowed the claim, saying that, in fact, he didn't even have a brother and never had, so the rumors were completely baseless. But as we here at the SCP Foundation know, the truth has never gotten in the way of a good story. So Lewis, Joseph, and Sydney were happy to remain believers as long as they could keep having fun chasing alleged digital ghosts. How could any of these boys know that in the midst of their fun, they'd run into a real monster amidst Minecraft's blocky vistas? It was a school night like any other when they made that first fateful expedition. It was 7:15 p.m., and the boys were all in their shared server. Lewis had chicken tenders, Joseph had chicken nuggets, and Sydney, who'd eaten his dinner earlier than the others, was snacking on a pack of Skittles. They'd all outfitted their characters with full diamond armor, with diamond swords to match, because Joseph had somehow convinced the others that diamonds were ghost-proof. He read it on the internet, he claimed. Together, the three boys had made themselves an impressive Minecraft castle to be the base of their Herobrine hunting operations. A safe haven surrounded by high stone walls and mob-repelling torches to keep them safe if ever they got a little too spooked while playing. Though playing was perhaps too mild a word for it. In the minds of these three boys, they were doing extremely important investigative work. After all, if they managed to actually find Herobrine themselves, they would be creepypasta legends. And wouldn't that be worth all the hours upon hours of rigorous mining and crafting? They'd been methodical in their search, scoping out different corners of the map and canvassing them together, searching high and low, and then marking said area off their checklist.
It was a level of consideration and thought that their parents and teachers had long wished the boys would put into their home or schoolwork. But alas, seeing as none of the homework was find Herobrine, they really weren't that interested. Today, they were searching an area deep in the misty forests in the dead of night. They fought off a few spiders and sword-wielding skeletons. Thankfully, no creepers. Aw man. And kept foraging on into the darkness. "It's so creepy out here," Lewis said over his headset. "Why do we have to come out here at night? It's way more dangerous with all the mobs. The night is like the perfect time for ghosts," Sydney retorted. "You think a ghost is gonna start hanging around in the middle of the day? No way, it's gotta be at night, man." And Lewis simply could not argue with such incredibly sound logic. They forged on, doing their typical methodical search for any phenomenon that one might generously be able to describe as supernatural. So you can only imagine the excitement coursing through them when Joseph discovered a strange, dark cave that looked as though it had no business being there. While each held their own private reservations, they all knew what they needed to do: go inside and investigate. As they entered the cave, a few strange realizations occurred to them, such as the fact that there were seemingly no mobs down here. A cave in the dead of night? Surely there should be some enemies, right? Plus, the typical lighting implements, like torches and lanterns, didn't seem to offer the same kind of illumination that they normally would. It was almost like the darkness was more oppressive here, more tangible. There was undeniably something eerie about the whole setup. That much couldn't be denied. "You guys see anything?" Lewis asked. "No," Joseph said, sounding oddly cautious, as though he sensed something strange was on the horizon. Something that perhaps these boys shouldn't see. "Yeah, I haven't seen anything either," Sydney chimed in. "Maybe we should—" Joseph screamed, and the two others turned their Minecraft avatars to look at him. Joseph's character had bumped into something, some stranger in the cave. An NPC design that looked oddly realistic for something inhabiting the purposefully lo-fi blocky world of Minecraft. It seemed to have a dark, furry body, with a canid skull-like face bearing a pair of milky white eyes that seemed to stare off into nothingness. Was this another mob? Maybe something added in the latest patch? If so, why wasn't it attacking? "What is that thing?" Lewis asked over his headset. "I don't know," Joseph replied. "It's so creepy though." Suddenly, a message appeared on the screen, as though it had been typed and sent by another player, a player with the username MalO. The message read, "Hey, that isn't very nice. You shouldn't judge on appearances, kid." That certainly gave them pause. So many things about this didn't make sense. It had all the hallmarks of an NPC, but apparently it understood their voices and could send messages. It clearly wasn't actually another player in a conventional sense, but it didn't attack like your typical mob. None of the boys could really make sense of what they were dealing with here. "Are you a hacker?" Sydney asked. "No," MalO typed back. "I'm just lonely and a long way from home. It's nice to have your company down here, though. I don't get visitors often." "Have you heard of Herobrine?" Lewis asked. MalO typed back. "Is he a friend of yours? You should introduce him to me. I love making new friends." The three boys were, in some regards, rather mature and polite for their ages, and so remained civil with this bizarre, mysterious figure, who was curious and inquisitive, asking them questions about their school lives and their friends. It did seem earnestly happy for their company, so it didn't give any of them the sense that it was a threat. As night drew on and the boys' respective parents told them it was time to log off and get some shut-eye, MalO finally typed, "I've really enjoyed hanging out with you kids. Come back and visit me again tomorrow. If you don't, I'll come visit you instead." None of the kids picked up on the probably rather obvious stranger danger vibes of this message, and instead they went to bed, excited and curious. The next day they met up on the playground for a kind of State of the Union on the strange phenomenon they had encountered the night before. "Do you think it has anything to do with Herobrine?" Lewis asked. "Forget Herobrine," Sydney replied, eliciting gasps from the two others. "All the other people have Herobrine. We have something better, something only we've discovered. We've got MalO." Later that night, Joseph, who was probably the most studious of the group, tried to do a little background research on MalO. Everything seemed to turn up dead ends, aside from one slightly shady-looking app called MalO version 1.0.0. Its description read, "Never settle for those awkward feelings of being alone ever again.
MalO is an exciting and interactive experience that will keep you engaged and intrigued. The anxiety of social situations can be nerve-wracking, but just after a few hours of MalO, you will soon forget all about those painful emotions of disappointment. Be part of the new craze that is quickly becoming the next social substitute. Remember, the more you participate, the more MalO will engage you. Your experience is completely up to you. Absolutely no ads. Enjoy! Weird. So unless the thing they encountered on Minecraft was some kind of weird viral marketing campaign for the app, it was probably just a coincidence. Maybe it was a popular character from Japan or something. Either way, for the next several days, the boys honored their promise. They'd visit MalO in the cave every night and chat, trying to tactfully get more information out of it. Though the best they could get on the entity's origin was the cryptic statement, "I'm not usually here, but everyone wants a vacation once in a while, don't they? We can't just spend our whole life on a phone." They'd become so acclimated to MalO over the days that they forgot what the entity had said to them the very first day they met. "Come back and visit me again tomorrow. If you don't, I'll come visit you instead." But on the day that they didn't come and visit MalO, because Miss Grayson had sent a particularly challenging piece of English homework, they received a frightening reminder. That very night, they all started receiving strange texts on their phones. As you can probably expect, they were all photographs, each and every one depicting some regular haunt that the boys all liked to frequent, with one addition. MalO's grinning skull face hiding somewhere in the image, like some kind of demented parody of Where's Waldo. The strangeness of this new development left all the boys shaken, and they hopped back onto Minecraft as quickly as possible to go find and talk to MalO in its cave. However, this time the cave was empty, and MalO was nowhere to be seen. But the text still didn't stop. They'd come in so frequently, with MalO getting closer to home, literally in each one. The boys thought about telling their parents, but would their parents believe them? They'd probably lump MalO in with the same tall tales of childhood imagination as Herobrine, and write it off as bored kids playing a prank, even though in this case, it was anything but. More photos arrived. In these ones, MalO was right outside each of the children's homes, lurking, watching. In some of the photos, they could see themselves in the windows, going about their evening business, having no idea of the creature lurking just outside. None of the boys felt like playing Minecraft that night. It wasn't fun anymore. Instead, they shut themselves up in their rooms, closed and locked their windows, and pulled down the blinds, after checking under the beds with flashlights, of course. But still more photos came in, all depicting MalO getting closer and closer and closer. Right about the time they were wondering whether the scratching on the outside of their bedroom door was real or just a figment of their imagination, another dark irony had occurred to them. All this time trying to find something supernatural, and in the very end, something supernatural had instead found them. Want an anomaly of your own? Check out scpswag.com for high-quality SCP merch. Today we're getting scary. Scientifically scary. When a fear becomes so severe that it might get in the way of you living your normal life, it becomes known as a phobia. We'd wager to say that almost everyone watching this video suffers from at least one of them, and given we'll be covering a staggering 28 phobias today, there's a good chance that statistically, one of them is yours. But we're SCP Explained, not Phobias Explained, so naturally we're going to be putting our own spin on the concept of debilitating terror. At the time of this video's recording, there are well over 6,000 anomalies documented by the SCP Foundation. Some are cute and adorable, some are funny, some are badass, but most of them are pants-soilingly terrifying. That's why today, we're running down our big list of 28 soul-shattering phobias and giving you the perfect anomaly for each one. It's going to get scary out here, so please, don't say we didn't warn you. First, we've got agoraphobia, the fear of open spaces. People with this phobia often avoid leaving home, fearing that they'll have a panic attack in a wide-open, unfamiliar space. This is precisely why anyone suffering from agoraphobia would hate to have a run-in with SCP-093, the Red Sea object. When placed against a mirror, this unassuming little talisman can transport you to a nightmarish world of wide, desolate deserts populated by craggy, faceless giants out for your blood. With nowhere safe to seclude yourself away, SCP-093's nightmarish dimension would be an agoraphobe's living nightmare. Then there's acrophobia, the fear of heights. This is an incredibly common one, and if being high up enough has ever induced vertigo and made your legs turn to jello beneath you, then you can probably relate. But hey, simply don't go anywhere high up, right? Nice and easy. Except SCP-3007, a deadly info hazard, has the terrifying ability to bring those heights to you. If you're infected by SCP-3007, you'll have ultra-immersive hallucinations of yourself teetering on the huge and impossibly high-up walkways of a city full of silver spires. And if this makes you dizzy, remember, it's not just a dream. If you fall from a great height in your hallucination, you'll die in real life. But maybe you'd take being at the top of the tower over having to deal with anything that has 8 legs. That is, if you have arachnophobia, the fear of spiders. This one is self-explanatory. Some people are just debilitatingly terrified of spiders, and they likely think about it a lot. You might even say they have intrusive arachnid thoughts like SCP-662, an anomaly that's likely to scare an arachnophobe to death. Literally. If you see a tiny pink spider with a strange pattern on its back, it may already be over for you, as the horrors of SCP-632 flood your mind with thoughts of spiders, and your brain matter literally transforms into a vast, skittering colony of the little beasts. Maybe the last anomaly has you wanting to just get up and fly away. Or maybe you suffer from pteromerhanophobia, the fear of flying. Of course, it's nothing to be ashamed of. Unless you're enough of a baller to have a private jet, you probably agree with everyone else that flying absolutely sucks, especially if the flight you're taking is SCP-787. This cursed plane is filled with 515 human corpses, perfectly illustrating what you fear will happen to you on that plane. But it's also the site of a wide variety of terrifying anomalous happenings, from violent sounds to nightmarish figures roaming the cabin. And who thought flying could possibly get any worse? Next, we're going to box you in a little, which will absolutely terrify you if you suffer from claustrophobia, the fear of enclosed spaces. If people with claustrophobia are confined or locked up, they're likely to experience a full-blown panic attack. That's why they'd utterly despise SCP-1562, also known as the carnivorous slide. This seemingly ordinary tube slide will cause its victims to be teleported to a mysterious place in total darkness, so cramped that they can barely move, lodged into place by mysterious items in the tight tunnel around them. And if that wasn't scary enough, you're not alone in this terrible claustrophobic place either. You don't want to know what happens after that. But maybe it's not the confinement that scares you in that scenario, but the lack of light. If that's the case, you may have nyctophobia, the fear of the dark. And if you do suffer from nyctophobia, then you'd absolutely hate to be stuck in SCP-087, the staircase. This place is filled with a kind of darkness so oppressive that it doesn't follow the laws of physics. No matter how powerful light you bring in, it cannot penetrate the haze. As you descend deeper into the staircase, you'll find that your sense of dread will only increase as you begin to hear a child crying far below. If you're foolish enough to keep going, you may end up face to face with a certain pale, featureless face. Though maybe that entity didn't have nearly enough legs to scare you. Perhaps you suffer from entomophobia, the fear of insects. There are honestly more insectoid SCPs than we can even list right now. But for the entomophobia sufferers in our audience, we think the scariest one out there might be SCP-743, the chocolate fountain. Sounds delicious, right? We hope so. Because if not, you didn't die for much. Because anyone who eats the chocolate from SCP-743 is doomed to be eaten by the millions of flying ant creatures within. You'll die screaming, surrounded by horrific buzzing and feeling a million tiny legs crawling all over your body. How lovely. Now, picture an ocean. A vast roiling ocean whipped to and fro by nautical winds. Maybe this comforts you, or maybe it terrifies you. Because you've got thalassophobia. the fear of the sea. This is an incredibly popular fear because, let's be real, there are a lot of really scary things under the sea. Terrifying things you'll never forget, or maybe things you'll definitely forget. Like SCP-3000 Anatashisha. This astronomically large eel produces amnestics which lull its victims into a false sense of security before devouring them. And hell, if the ocean itself is that terrifying to you, maybe being eaten by a massive eel god would be a reprieve for you. Let's get back out of the water and onto land, where all kinds of things are slithering. If that makes you nervous, you might have ophidiophobia, the fear of snakes. And if you do, you're going to be mortally terrified of SCP-5430, an eastern garter snake that has even greater locomotive abilities than the average snake, because it has 48 legs, connected by thaumaturgic means. It's essentially the snake equivalent of a centipede. We don't even have ophidiophobia, and that's a pretty terrifying thought to us. But maybe we need to think bigger, or maybe a lot bigger. If that sentiment makes you feel a little nervous, though, you may suffer from megalophobia, the fear of large things. There are many large and terrifying SCPs in this world, but few are quite as dizzyingly massive as SCP-2317-K, also known as the Devourer of Worlds. Just how big is this very hungry boy locked away behind the door to another world? According to our best estimates, it's a little over 200 kilometers tall, roughly equivalent to 451 Empire State Buildings stacked on top of each other. Geez, that makes us feel a little dizzy. Let's stop thinking about that, and instead consider the most frightening thing of all. Spooky, scary skeletons. Skelephobia, the fear of skeletons. And for those afraid of skeletons, SCP-3114 would be an elementally terrifying entity to encounter. This living skeleton actually hates being a skeleton, so much so that if it encounters a human being who does have skin, it tears the skin off in a jealous rage and wears it like a costume. So if you do have skelephobia, you'd be lucky to encounter SCP-3114 when it's wearing a tasteful human skin outfit. Then I'm sure it wouldn't be terrifying at all. Okay, it's no secret that we sometimes like to be funny here on SCP Explained. Much like Dr. Bright, we use humor as a coping mechanism. We're happy to be a little clownish now and then. That wouldn't be so chill for people who suffer from colorophobia, the fear of clowns. And for those terrified of clowns, we know one show you definitely shouldn't watch. SCP-993 Bobble the Clown. This jolly cartoon nightmare is a clown that loves to teach kids the tools of his trade, like breaking and entering, murder, cannibalism, and arson, just to name a few. If you're afraid of clowns and you encounter this show as a kid, you'd be traumatized for life. Thankfully though, if you encounter it as an adult, you'll just pass out. Small mercies, huh? Now, some phobias truly can wreck your life. They can make you afraid of something so common, so ubiquitous, it makes you wonder how you can even function. One example is helophobia, the fear of the sun. However, we'd all be sharing this phobia if SCP-001 when daybreaks came to pass. Simply being exposed to the sunlight would cause you to melt into a deranged blob. However, if this ever happened, people suffering from heliophobia may actually be the most likely people to survive, because they've already spent their life building strategies to help them avoid the piercing gaze of the sun. So maybe keep a heliophobe in your life, just to be safe. Some phobias are, thankfully, a lot easier for you to avoid. Take, for example, coasterphobia, the fear of roller coasters. If you have this problem, just don't go on a roller coaster, but especially not SCP-2183, also known ominously as the ride never ends. If you end up on this ride, you'll be hurtling through the sky, screaming in terror forever. Not fun for anyone, least of all coasterphobes. But maybe roller coasters don't make you nervous. Maybe being watched makes you nervous. Maybe the idea that there could be a pair of mysterious eyes boring into you right now that makes your skin crawl. If this is true, you may have scopatophobia, the fear of being stared at. And if you have scopatophobia and you're not a furry who's down ludicrously bad, then you'd be terrified after downloading the MalO app. also known as SCP-1471. If you download the app, you'll be stalked by the skull-faced MalO, which will stare at you from all your favorite places. That'll get your heart rate up, one way or another. I'll say no more after that. Hey, is it getting hot in here? Can you smell smoke? Can you hear that strange crackling noise? I certainly hope you don't have pyrophobia, the fear of fire. Fearing fire is honestly pretty natural, given it can burn you to death, especially if you're a liar who's trapped inside SCP-2128, a terrifying device known as the Liar's Cradle. If ever you're locked inside its deadly furnace, you better choose your words carefully, or the cradle will detect your mistruth and incinerate you. And wouldn't it suck to be terrified and agonized as you die? But perhaps you don't fear fire, you just fear ladies that are smoking hot. That means you have caluniphobia, the fear of beautiful women. Yes, it is real, and if you suffer from this phobia, then you'd be terrified of SCP-056, also known as a beautiful person. The ideal form of this conceited entity is the famous actor Scarlett Johansson. So if you're afraid of beautiful women, then this entity will horrify you to your core. They're just a real jerk too. What if the early 2010s were just an absolute nightmare for you? Because there were zombies everywhere. Movies, TV shows, Halloween costumes, zombie walks, and more merchandise than you can shake Negan's baseball bat Lucille at. This probably means you have kinemortophobia, the fear of zombies. And if that is the case, stay the hell away from victims of SCP-008. This lethal and contagious pathogen creates mindless and extremely aggressive zombies, whose only purpose is to spread their disease to others, adding additional members to their teeming mindless horde. So if that's not your thing, either keep your distance, or make sure you have some SCP-500 pills close to hand. Next, we have another ubiquitous nightmare, hydrophobia, the fear of water. It's everywhere, and you literally need it to survive, so it's a bummer to be petrified by it. Though at least with SCP-1128, the aquatic horror, you'll have a very good reason to be afraid of water. After all, if you see a picture or get a comprehensive description of this massive underwater monster, no body of water is safe. From bathtubs to cups to swimming pools to puddles, the horror will stalk you relentlessly and eat you alive. And now from big horrors to tiny ones, microphobia, the fear of small things. There's a joke I'd like to make here, but then we wouldn't make any money on this video. Anyway, for anyone paranoid about puny perils, I bet it's a nightmare to encounter SCP-165, the creeping, hungry sands of Thule. Because while it may look like a pile of sand, it's actually a giant pile of almost microscopic flesh-eating mites. Sleep tight. Oh, was that a thundercrack I just heard? I hope nobody here suffers from astrophobia, the fear of storms. Though I think we'd all be afraid of storms if we had a run-in with SCP-3280 after the storm. This is an extremely dangerous blob of living water, which is able to incorporate even more water into its mass. Its favorite hobby is crawling into your body, stealing all your water, then bursting out, leaving you dead. And why do storms make it even more dangerous? Because it gives the creature a heavy supply of water, and if this thing ever gets into the water cycle, we're probably all doomed. Let's move from existential threats to the threat of murder most foul, and that's foul with a W. We're talking about electorophobia, the fear of chickens. Of course, the average chicken probably couldn't kill you, at least not without considerable prep time. But killing you is incredibly easy for the abominable chicken-human hybrids known as SCP-3199. Humans refuted. These horrific creations of a mad evolutionary scientist would strike fear into anyone, but especially someone predisposed to fear chicken-like beings. But what if we took a fear of an animal that could even kill you without any anomalous influence? A phobia like cynophobia, the fear of dogs. And that fear would only be made worse by a run-in with the ominous SCP-023, also known as Black Shuck. If you see this terrifying furry beast, then it means you're going to die soon. This is one dog you really can't call a good boy. But hey, we're fair and balanced here at SCP Explained. That's why we're also including Illurophobia, the fear of cats. And if you are afraid of cats, then you might be one of the few people who survive a run-in with SCP-247, ironically dubbed a harmless kitten. This is a lie, because this innocent-looking little cat is actually a highly aggressive, fully grown tiger that we just happen to perceive as a cute little kitten. Being afraid of it despite its adorable disguise is probably the best way to not get mauled. Now, let's go from furry to slimy. That's right, it's Baractrophobia, the fear of amphibians. Frogs, toads, newts. If it can traverse both water and land, you're afraid of it. That's why, despite her good-hearted nature, you'd probably have a heart attack if you ran into SCP-811, the Swamp Woman. She's not mean, but she is green. And she does excrete dangerous acidic mucus. If you're afraid of frogs, seeing this huge humanoid frog-like entity would be an excellent way to ruin your latest pair of tighty-whities. Maybe you're fine with frogs though, but would absolutely die on the spot if you were faced with a lizard. That means you've probably got herpetophobia, the fear of reptiles. The worst thing you could possibly run into is extremely obvious here. SCP-662. The legendary, infamous, hard-to-destroy reptile. There are some scary lizards out there, but none quite as scary as this, because it hates all life, including you, and probably enjoys the fact that you fear it. Though, for what it's worth, we think being utterly terrified of running into this reptile is a very rational fear. Now for a slightly more abstract terror, autophobia, the fear of being alone. How do you feel about isolation? Of being separated from all your friends and family, nobody to hear you, nobody to help you, alone. If you can feel your chest tightening at these words, not only do you probably have autophobia, it'd be your absolute worst nightmare to be trapped in SCP-3001, the Red Reality, where poor Dr. Scranton was forced to spend the rest of eternity. You're probably beyond the help of everyone here, even reality itself. In other words, it's a nasty, nasty place to be, no matter what you fear. And perhaps the most irrational real phobia in this video, it's bibliophobia, the fear of books. Typically, books cannot hurt you, unless you get a paper cut or one falls on you off a shelf. There are, however, notable exceptions. Perhaps the most terrifying of all is SCP-140, a cursed tome known as an incomplete chronicle, or a chronicle of the Devas. Anytime this book is exposed to human blood, it expands and rewrites itself, bringing the nightmarish Davite Empire closer to ruling the world as it is today. In this and only this very specific instance, bibliophobia is extremely justified. And there you have it, folks. We're sorry for giving you a mild to moderate case of the heebie-jeebies. Which of these phobias apply to you? And do you think there are any other important ones we missed? Let us know down in the comments. And of course, remember to subscribe and ring the bell to turn on notifications, or all your worst nightmares will become reality. If you ever take a trip across the pond to some of the more rural parts of the British Isles, you might just hear some tales of a dark, shadowy shape, a creature stalking through the night, an omen of death. It's an entity that has been known by many names, including the Grim or Black Shuck. Most folks will tell you the same, that this nightmare takes on the form of a huge black dog, but is also known to be able to change its shape, often appearing at nighttime. The apparition is said to be demonic in nature, commonly associated with the devil himself, believed by some to be a hellhound like Garmr and Cerberus, guardians of the underworld in Norse and Greek mythology. The dog is far larger than your average pet, with big glowing eyes. It is also known to stalk crossroads, ancient pathways, and places where executions took place. Those who catch sight of Black Shuck are often befallen with bad luck, and for some it can even mean that death will soon be upon them. Of course, this is nothing more than a bit of local folklore, spooky tales designed to drum up tourism. But is the Black Shuck really just a legend, or is there something more to the tale? After all, it's not as if a dog like that could really exist, could it? Enter SCP-023, otherwise known as, yes, you guessed it, the Black Shuck. Much like the creatures from the stories, SCP-023 is an entity possessing a canine form, far larger than most domesticated dogs. SCP-023 is described as being shaggy in appearance, with black fur and glowing orange-red eyes, as well as prominent fangs. Through testing, the SCP Foundation has determined a number of the dog's anomalous abilities. First and foremost, legends have described the Black Shuck as an apparition or spirit, and much in the same vein, SCP-023 is able to pass right through solid matter. The creature can pass through walls seemingly at will, but does also seem to have a physical form, at least when it is kept in containment. To prevent a breach, the Foundation keeps SCP-023 in a walled-off intersection of 2 corridors, sporting fake doors at 3 of its 4 ends, with only one real entrance. Why does the dog's containment unit require such a specific layout? Simple. It has to resemble a crossroad, even if this is merely a superficial resemblance. Remember that the Black Shuck of legend often appeared at crossroads, a sign that would warn those traveling of their impending doom. As long as SCP-023 remains contained in a cell resembling crossroads, it cannot pass through walls. Should the Black Shuck ever escape this enclosure, however, then it will use its anomalous abilities to incinerate anything in its path. The dog can burn through walls no matter how dense, and will travel from location to location by this method. Also in keeping with the Shuck of folklore, looking into the eyes of SCP-023 can hold potentially devastating outcomes. Should any person make direct eye contact with the dog, then death will be upon them. Within the span of the next full year, either the person who looked at the Black Shuck in the eye or a close member of their family will die, just like a number of the legends state. The Foundation has no concrete idea how the Shuck chooses its victims, with no patterns or obvious preferences, only that they will die a year after eye contact. Researchers aren't even sure if SCP-023 selects its victims from the moment eye contact is made, or if this choice is made during the year that follows, or even if it is a conscious choice at all. All that is known for certain is that if you were to look into the beast's glowing eyes, there would be no way for you to tell if you or a relative would suffer the consequences, only when. In the past, the SCP Foundation attempted to eliminate an individual that looked into SCP-023's eyes, along with their whole family before the year was up, trying to take any potential victims away from the Black Shuck before they could be hunted down by the anomalous canine. Much like the way the creature passes through walls by incinerating solid matter, the way SCP-023 dispatches its chosen victims seem to almost be linked to the use of heat. The Foundation has conducted a number of autopsies on those killed by SCP-023, and their findings have always yielded the same result. Anyone killed by the Black Shuck will not exhibit any signs of external damage, no burn marks on their skin or any kind of contusions. However, on closer inspection, these bodies appear to have been filled in, their insides replaced with highly compacted ash. All their organs and internal bodily systems appear to be incinerated by the Black Shuck, but somehow this occurs so rapidly that there is no notable damage caused to the outside of their bodies. To prevent SCP-023 claiming any further victims, the Foundation has another measure in place. The Black Shuck has been fitted with 2 spheres made of hard rubber. These are inserted into the creature's sunken-in eye sockets, blocking anyone from accidentally making eye contact with it. However, over time, thanks to the heating effect of the Shuck's state, these inserts will begin to degrade. When security cameras detect that the glow of SCP-023's eyes have returned to a dangerous level, Foundation personnel will have to replace the rubber spheres to once again block the creature's vision. However, this can only be done after sunset, and any personnel tasked with replacing the inserts are cautioned not to look the dog in the eyes during the process, unless they want to become the Black Shuck's next victim. The SCP Foundation first came into contact with SCP-023 when they received information about an attack that had taken place at a church. While the location of this incident is unknown, if the legends are to be believed, the church may have been located in the moors of a rural region of the British Isles. While the church was in the middle of a service, the Black Shuck entered and killed a number of civilians in attendance.
Presumably the members of this congregation had all at some point seen the large black dog out in the moors, or one of their relatives had.
The Foundation stepped in and managed to capture the Black Shuck, giving amnestics to the survivors that had witnessed the attack. The damage done by SCP-023 and the deaths it caused were covered up as attempted arson. However, the Foundation's trouble with SCP-023 was far from over. After the Black Shuck's capture at the church, the dog was able to breach containment on multiple occasions. At first, it had been placed in a standard containment chamber, but it was quickly able to incinerate through the concrete walls of the cell. Foundation personnel later discovered that the dog had settled in an intersection between two corridors and realized that it had resembled a crossroad. These exact corridors became the basis for SCP-023's new containment chamber, and the assistant researcher originally assigned to the dog was reprimanded for negligence. During this and other escape attempts, SCP-023 caused the deaths of a high number of Foundation personnel. As a direct result, researchers assigned to it requested that the Black Shuck be reclassified as a Keter class anomaly. They also noted that SCP-023 shared certain traits with SCP-1111-1, one of the two entities that form SCP-1111. SCP-1111-1, also referred to as the White Dog, possesses an almost ghostly translucent canine form and abilities that focus on geographic space. In the White Dog's case, it will attack anyone it detects approaching SCP-1111-2, the body of an unidentified man hanging from a noose. Researchers working for the Foundation believe that SCP-023 and SCP-1111-1 might be instances of the same phenomenon, but have been unable to capture the White Dog in order to verify this. Given the number of deaths the Black Shuck had caused, research personnel attempted to reduce the danger that they faced when interacting with the dog. They helped to remove the beast's eyes and teeth, thus making it safer. However, it was during an attempt to do so that SCP-023 once again managed to breach containment. At first, everything seemed to be going according to plan. But when researchers removed SCP-023's eyes, the Black Shuck vanished completely from its containment area. SCP security staff scoured the area for it, eventually tracking the dog down to a long stretch of interstate. It is still unknown exactly how many civilians may have seen the Black Shuck as they drove past it, but so far 9 deaths are thought to have stemmed from this incident. The ghostly dog was recaptured, and D-Class personnel removed its fangs. After analyzing the times of incidents, researchers realized that SCP-023 had only been able to escape while the sun was up, leading to new containment procedures mandating that no staff member was to interact with the Shuck until after sunset. The interstate fiasco led to the doctor assigned to watch over SCP-023 being suspended and facing a disciplinary review from his Foundation superiors. The blame for the breach in security that caused the incident was placed at his feet, and a new doctor was placed in charge of observing the Black Shuck. Unfortunately for this new researcher, the incidents involving SCP-023 did not stop there. The newly appointed doctor attempted to give the dog a pair of glass eyes to replace the ones that had been removed before the previous containment breach. Perhaps they thought it was a gesture of kindness, a compassionate act, or maybe they just thought it would look cool for a dog to have glass eyes. No matter the reason, it seemed they had forgotten for a moment that this huge shadow creature was an ancient evil entity and not a dog at all. When the doctor gave the new glass eyes to SCP-023, they immediately took on the exact same properties as its old ones. They began glowing, molten glass leaking from the dog's sockets, and appeared on all reflective surfaces throughout the site the Shuck was being held at. Everything from mirrors and windows to lenses and glasses, computer monitors, anything and everything glass. The Foundation suffered an enormous number of deaths that day. Even staff sitting in the cafeteria would have seen a version of those orange glowing eyes staring at them from the bottom of their bowls, marking them for a fiery death. The facility was quickly evacuated, but the damage had already been done. Anyone that had seen a reflection of the Black Shuck's eyes would be dead within a year. Devastated, the new doctor in charge of overseeing SCP-023 blamed themselves for dooming their research team, as well as the rest of the Foundation staff in the facility. When the sun came up over the horizon, a number of D-Class personnel were sent into SCP-023's enclosure, only to find that the dog had once again vanished. The only trace it had left behind was a puddle of molten glass burning part of the floor. A year later, any and all personnel that had gazed into the Black Shuck's eyes were dead, and their remains were buried in a mass, unmarked grave near the containment facility. Despite the doctor vowing to recapture and contain SCP-023, it remains unclear if they were ever actually successful. There is a chance that the Black Shuck has been gradually making its way back home to the moors of the British Isles. If so, we advise you not to travel after sundown unless you absolutely have to. And if you find yourself at a crossroad, then pray you don't catch sight of a hulking demonic hound staring out at you with eyes that burn through the dark. If you do, well, we hope you enjoy your year.
Joseph and Frank were two lifelong squatchers. No, that isn't an insult. That's a self-given title for Bigfoot enthusiasts who are willing to head out into the woods and search for the legendary Sasquatch firsthand. While most squatchers will go their whole lives without ever encountering one, Joseph and Frank were about to get lucky. They just didn't know what kind of luck. During a journey through the forests of the Pacific Northwest, Frank spotted something moving in the distance. A huge ape-like creature with grayish fur and human-like movements. Frank thought he was finally laying eyes on the mighty Bigfoot after decades of searching. What he didn't know was that he just made a deadly mistake. He had looked directly at SCP-1000, and there would be terrible consequences. Frank was excited. He just achieved the life goal of any squatcher. He tapped Joseph on the shoulder and directed him to look in the direction of the creature. Joseph followed Frank's direction and stared into the distance. When his eyes finally came into focus on the ape-like beast, he froze. His brain just short-circuited. 1 second he was about to encounter the holy grail of his hobby, and the next, he was literally brain dead. Joseph collapsed. In the distance, the ape-like creature disappeared back into the woods. Not that Frank even noticed. He was too busy trying to wake Joseph, but it was no use. Joseph was gone, and Frank had no idea why. The headlines read, "Bigfoot killed my friend." Most people either ignored it or laughed it off. Just a couple of cranks goofing off in a forest and one of them had dropped dead. Who cares? Well, one organization cared. The SCP Foundation. Mobile Task Force Zeta 1000. The Foundation's specialized SCP-1000 detail were alerted to the reports. They sprang into action, tracking down and detaining Frank for questioning. They process 1 million loony Bigfoot lovers every year and usually find nothing, but the death of Frank's friend made it all too clear. They hadn't encountered a Bigfoot, but a real, genuine example of SCP-1000. SCP-1000 rarely ranks among the scariest or most dangerous SCPs, but underestimating the creature is a terrible mistake, because just looking at it gives you a 2% chance of dropping dead on the spot. Frank, despite losing his friend, was one of the lucky ones. The Foundation debriefed him before administering amnestics and making sure that he'd never venture back into those mysterious forests in the Pacific Northwest region. Director Jones, the site director charged with the management of SCP-1000 populations, was given the information on this latest case of an SCP-1000 related fatality. It was a story he heard many times before. For Director Jones, they all seemed to bleed into one another. So what exactly is SCP-1000? And how did it leave poor Joseph dead in the woods? SCP-1000 is a whole species of large hominid ape-like creatures. They're largely nocturnal, but sightings of the creature during the day aren't unheard of. They're omnivorous, mostly seeming to consume plants and insects, and their fur is usually gray, brown, black, red, or occasionally white. The creatures have large eyes capable of impressive vision nestled underneath a pronounced Neanderthal-like brow. Another defining feature is the ridge of bone on the forehead, much like that of a gorilla, that is present in both sexes. According to Foundation studies, the creatures exhibit a level of intelligence on par with that of the common chimpanzee, but nowhere near that of us humans. What they lack in intelligence, though, they make up for in size. The adults can be as large as 10 feet tall and weigh up to 600 pounds. Despite their great size and impressive strength, the creatures are neither aggressive nor territorial. In fact, they seem to instinctively avoid humans, mostly residing deep in the forests of the American Pacific Northwest and in the Himalayan Alps. There have been sightings of SCP-1000 on every continent, though the Foundation has taken pains to exterminate all SCP-1000 populations situated near human population centers to prevent a potential disaster, considering the 2% chance of instantaneous death upon visual contact. That brings us to our second question. What is it that makes these seemingly harmless creatures so dangerous? Sadly, for both these unfortunate creatures and us humans, the danger is beyond the control of SCP-1000. According to Foundation research, SCP-1000 likely evolved alongside us Homo sapiens until a tragedy occurred between 10 and 15,000 years ago. A mysterious extinction event eliminated the vast majority of their species, leaving only 1 to 5% alive in the aftermath. What happened? It's believed that around this time, SCP-1000 contracted what the Foundation refers to as an anomalous pseudo-disease. Meet SCP-1000-F1. A disease that is passed along at the genetic level and is so durable that it persists in the species to this day. The tiny fraction of the population that are immune to its effects manage to survive, but the majority who aren't immune die shortly after birth. This is why the overall population remains relatively low to this day. It's a disease that only appears to affect hominids, including humans, chimpanzees, bonobos, and non-immune instances of SCP-1000. Any hominid that lays eyes on a carrier of the disease has a 2% chance of experiencing immediate brain death. While a 2% chance of instant death may not seem all that threatening, at least when compared to some other nightmare-inducing SCPs, the truly scary part is that the percentage is cumulative. In other words, the longer one observes a carrier of SCP-1000-F1, the higher that percentage rises, the greater your chance of experiencing an abrupt death. According to Foundation studies, the percentage rises by around 1% every 20 minutes, and the percentage also varies between specimens, with some exhibiting a terrifyingly high death chance of 90% upon viewing. This death chance continues to occur in dead specimens if they carry the anomalous pseudovirus while alive, though thankfully the risk doesn't appear to apply to small fur or tissue samples. The Foundation's true concern actually goes far beyond SCP-1000 themselves. Because of the species' close relation to Homo sapiens, there's a worry that SCP-1000-F1 could transmit to humans, causing our own species to meet a similar fate. If humans did indeed become carriers of SCP-1000-F1, it's extremely likely that humanity would undergo an unprecedented extinction event, with billions across the globe dropping dead as brain death sets in en masse. While full extermination of the entire species has been deemed unlikely, this existential threat they pose to humanity more than justifies the occasional culling of SCP-1000 populations. That was a lot to take in, right? First, the creature we thought was Bigfoot was actually a new species of SCP out in the wild. And second, these creatures could end human life as we know it if they made it into a population center. But what you're about to hear next, a dark secret only available to people with Level 3 SCP Foundation clearance, is the most shocking SCP-1000 fact of all. Are you ready? The true secret of SCP-1000 is that what you've just heard is a lie. There is no anomalous pseudo-disease, and SCP-1000 poses no pathogenic threat to humanity whatsoever. Who would spread such a thing? The SCP Foundation, of course. Strictly speaking, the Foundation has disseminated 2 direct lies about the nature of SCP-1000. The first is that of the disease, which does not exist, nor has it ever existed. The second lie is about the creature's intelligence level. They're far smarter than the average chimp. In fact, they're every bit as intelligent as human beings. These were all lies formulated by Director Jones and the Foundation, as was the very existence of the Bigfoot myth. The Foundation has been spreading information that makes the very concept of the Sasquatch out to be a joke for decades, all to discredit and further push the very concept of SCP-1000 into the shadows. But why? The Foundation is no stranger to coming up with cover stories, but why would they put intentional lies into their own files to anyone below a Level 3 clearance? Well, that all comes down to the horrifying truth behind the origins of today's SCP-1000 population. The creatures were first brought to the attention of the Foundation by outcast members of the Serpent's Hand, an organization dedicated to defying the Foundation's activities. These members, known as the Children of the Sun, told them the secret history of SCP-1000. While at first, Foundation personnel like Director Jones didn't want to believe what they were hearing, they soon came to terms with the horrifying truth. Humans and SCP-1000 did evolve alongside each other, with humans occupying the day and SCP-1000 the night. However, while humans were still basic hunter-gatherers, SCP-1000 were undergoing vast intellectual and societal development. They were able to create tools, weapons, agriculture, stable settlements, domesticated animals, and eventually even fully developed cities. It was like nothing the world had ever seen, and wouldn't see for thousands of years to come. Their numbers swelled into the tens of billions as they created culture and technology hitherto unimagined, including weapons of devastating power. Meanwhile, humanity was pushed to the brink of destruction by their competitors' rapid and seemingly unstoppable growth. It looked as though the human species had lost the evolutionary arms race and would have to bow out. But according to the Children of the Sun, a trickster forest god smiled upon humanity and gave them the power to use SCP-1000's weapons and technology against them. 70% of SCP-1000's population were wiped out in a single horrific day, known to the Children of the Sun as the Day of the Flowers, as every flower supposedly bloomed that day during the massacre. Humanity destroyed the entire civilization, and with the same technology they stole from these unfortunate creatures, the vengeful humans drove the apes mad. Their higher consciousnesses were blocked out, reducing them back into the states of mere animals. Once the massacre was done and everything that was built had been destroyed, we, the human race, used the SCP-1000 weapons to wipe any memory of the atrocity from our own minds. The advanced civilization of SCP-1000 had been wiped from history. Humans returned to their plodding path of evolution, none the wiser. For thousands of years, all the way up until today, this time remained a mystery to us. So again, why did the Foundation lie to us? What did they have to gain by convincing us all that it was dangerous to even look at these creatures? Well, as the frequency of sightings and the attempts of communication increased, people like Director Jones became aware of a frightening possibility. What if the pendulum was swinging back? What if the apes were regaining their lost intelligence and, worse, still harbored feelings of revenge for what we did to their species thousands of years ago? Even the mere possibility that they could do to us what we once did to them is a chance that the Foundation simply cannot take, and thus, limiting contact between humans and SCP-1000 at all costs is an absolute must. However, in spite of the Foundation's fears, one intercepted message from the apes suggests that their paranoia may be misplaced. This message, translated from an attempt at communicating with Foundation personnel, reads simply as follows: "We forgive you. Given choice for now, not forever. Let us back in." It's enough to make you wonder what species the Foundation should really be keeping tabs on here. After all, when it comes to meting out violence and death, humanity has a track record to rival the worst creatures in the Foundation containment cells, and few examples illustrate that better than the tragic case of SCP-1000.
As history often teaches us, sometimes human beings are the biggest monsters of all. Of course, when you join the ranks of the SCP Foundation, that starts to seem even less likely. And why wouldn't it? After all, just look at some of the creatures they encounter and keep in containment. A giant unkillable lizard, a being with toothy protrusions growing out of its body, a whole host of immortal eldritch beings that could destroy reality, and one sadistic old man who drags unsuspecting victims into his own personal hellscape. Monsters are a dime a dozen to the Foundation. Humanity could never be anywhere near as evil or as cruel as the real monsters, even on their worst day. Or at least, you'd think. Researcher Keltson had held much of the same mentality that the SCP Foundation had the job of defending humanity from the real monsters of the world. And it was because of that belief that he had never previously questioned the containment procedures in place for SCP-1000. These beings were a species of nocturnal and omnivorous apes, usually with bodies covered in either gray, brown, black, red, or white fur. Possessing the same level of intelligence as the common chimp, the SCP-1000s had been colloquially described as a species known as Bigfoot, linking them to the urban legend about an ape-like being of dubious existence. Keltson had hardly been surprised that Bigfoot itself was an anomalous SCP. There were already a number of others that the Foundation had encountered that seemed to have influenced popular folklore from different parts of the world. In fact, it was that unique subcategory of anomaly that Keltson was conducting research into when he came across the SCP-1000 files. He was trying to determine, in various cases, which came first, the anomaly or the legend. Did the existence of SCP-1000s inspire earlier human civilizations to pass on stories of the Sasquatch? Or had those word-of-mouth tales been somehow linked to the very origins of SCP-1000 themselves? Studying the files, Keltson knew there was a mimetic disease infecting hominids like SCP-1000. The infection meant that anyone who observed one of the Bigfoot creatures had, at minimum, a 2% chance of suffering instantaneous brain death. It would make discovering the link between the Sasquatch legend and SCP-1000 difficult, not being able to directly look at the apes. But Kelton hoped he wouldn't need to actually observe the creatures, only find evidence that proved which predated which, SCP-1000 or the legend of Bigfoot. The population of SCP-1000 was limited, although their highest concentrations were known to be found in the Pacific Northwest region of North America, as well as in the Himalayan mountain range in Asia. Being stationed at a Foundation facility in the US, researcher Kelton opted to mount an expedition to the former location. A few odd occurrences had taken place leading up to his departure. His car tires had been slashed and now needed repairing. Newspaper clippings were also left on Kelton's desk that told of various hikers' deaths taking place in the Pacific Northwest. A more paranoid person might interpret these as subtle, indirect threats. It certainly seemed as if someone in the SCP Foundation wasn't keen on Kelton departing for his research trip. Nevertheless, he changed tact and called in sick to work, sneaking away to a small airstrip and boarding a light cargo plane that smuggled him towards the forests of North America. Once he had arrived, night was already falling. Kelton was on his own, traversing the woods as the sun rapidly receded out of view behind the tree line, leaving the forest in darkness, save for the beam from his flashlight. The researcher was hardly an outdoorsy type and far from an expert at exploring the wilderness, but he pushed on into the heart of the woods, to the areas where the most sightings of SCP-1000 had been reported. It wasn't long before the torchlight fell over something imprinted in the woodland floor, a large footprint left by something bipedal and rather similar to an ape. Venturing further, the sound of twigs breaking caused Kelton to whirl around. The noise had come from nearby, making it louder than the low background ambience of the forest at night. He swung his flashlight in the direction he thought it had come from, only seeing the shadows of branches cast against the tree trunks. Then, another noise. Leaves rustling as something passed by, followed by more snapping of twigs, then the shaking of the leaves again. This thing, whatever it might have been, was encircling him. Frantically, Kelton tried to spot it with his light, when suddenly the beam fell over something tall, a hulking figure moving between the trees. Even from that split-second sighting, it was clearly an instance of SCP-1000. The momentary glimpse had reminded the intrepid researcher of an important detail. He couldn't look at them. A 2% chance of instant brain death seemed too low to worry about. But Kelton's research had described the effects of the mimetic disease to be cumulative. The longer an SCP-1000 ape was observed, the higher the chance of being killed on the spot by the infection. Snapping his eyes shut as tight as he could, Kelton was frozen to the spot, at the mercy of the sounds surrounding him. The SCP-1000 was drawing closer, enough for the researcher to detect its footsteps. His pulse quickened, along with his breathing to match. Although he was already aware that the apes weren't known for being aggressive, hearing its heavy breathing as it drew nearer was enough to make him uncertain. Kelton wasn't sure if the Bigfoot would attack him or pass him by, but by far the last thing he had expected was to hear it start speaking. "You, man," came a deep, gravelly voice. It was the kind of sound an animal makes that can almost be mistaken for speech. Kelton wasn't fully convinced it had been a word, rather just his ears playing tricks on him in a moment of heightened fear. "Human," it repeated much clearer. There was no mistaking it a second time. The SCP-1000 had spoken. You can talk?" Kelton exclaimed in disbelief. The Sasquatch didn't answer directly. Instead, the researcher detected the sound of receding footsteps. There was a pause as the SCP-1000 ape turned back to Kelton. "Follow, human," it said. "Open your eyes and follow me." What about the disease?" Kelton shouted, keeping his eyelids still screwed shut. "You'll be safe," the ape replied, before it resumed walking away. Cautiously opening his eyes and lifting his flashlight, Kelton could see the hairy figure making its way through the forest, its back turned to him. He could see it. The researcher could look directly at it, and yet nothing seemed to be happening. No adverse side effects, no instant brain death. The odds were low, Kelton reminded himself, as he began to warily follow the path of the ape. Following at a distance, he made sure to momentarily glance away, trying not to stare for too long at the SCP-1000 creature in the hope that might disrupt the mimetic effect of the infection. Before long, they had arrived at a cave deep in the heart of the forest. The embers of a small fire were still aglow near the rocky entrance. As they lumbered inside, the SCP-1000 threw extra wood on the fire, poking it with a long stick until the flames began to reach higher. The flickering orange gave Kelton a better look at the ape. Its large frame covered almost head to toe in brown fur. There was also something about the creature that seemed off. Not unsettling, but almost sad, melancholic, like it was lonely. The researcher had been so amazed that he could observe the creature for so long without dying that he'd barely focused in on the more important discovery. SCP-1000s were far more intelligent than the Foundation files had indicated, capable of not only speech, but emotion, too. Do you have a name? Kelton stammered, unsure where to start.
Grykor,
He replied.
that is my name.
Yeah, you'll have to forgive me. I'm a little taken aback by all this, the researcher hastily explained. You're able to articulate. Your species is advanced enough to have names.
Why should that be surprising?
Grykor asked. Well, it's just the Foundation seems to think you and your kind are, I don't mean any offense, but mindless beasts. The ape made a huffing, exhaling sound. Kelton noticed after a moment that they were chuckling, a dry, almost sarcastic chuckle. It was unlike anything he had expected to learn about SCP-1000. That reminded him of why he'd come here. Grykor, may I ask something? He cleared his throat. Nodding, the SCP-1000 instance poked at the fire again, paying little mind to the human in its company. Where did you and your people come from? Kelton asked. What's your history?
Why?
Grykor replied abruptly. You see, humans have these legends, stories about something called Bigfoot or Sasquatch. The Foundation, the humans I work with, they call you one and the same. I wanted to know if that was true. For a short moment, the creature paused. Then Grykor began to give Kelton the truth, the real truth. And as they spoke, it was as if the researcher could see the story unfolding, emphasized by the pain in the ape's teary eyes.
We were like you, long, long ago,
It began explaining.
We and humans, we evolved together side by side. For a time there was peace between us. But we began to grow faster, stronger, became smarter while you were left behind.
You evolved before early humans did? Kelton probed.
Indeed,
Grykor answered with a gentle nod.
we began to surpass the humans. You were still young, still hunting and foraging for food, while we were moving far beyond. Thousands and thousands of years, we were able to develop our culture, our technology, all before the humans had even come close to fire and the wheel.
But that doesn't make any sense, the researcher interjected yet again. If that was the case, mankind would have never had its chance to reach the top of the food chain. We would have died out, and that would have made you the dominant species on the planet.
We were,
the SCP-1000 ape replied. For a time. What happened? Grykor turned with a solemn look on their face.
You,
It replied plainly.
humans, happened. We covered the world, billions and billions of us. You were rare, as few as we are now. My people made technology far beyond anything humans have dreamt up, either before or since. Trains, ships, vehicles created from the trees and the animals. Communication using parts of insects and smaller creatures. Cities filled with us, where we lived in harmony, stretched out across parts of world humans dared not tread.
Organic technology, Kelton gasped. Fascinating.
We had weapons too, and that was our biggest mistake.
What kind of weapons? The researcher quizzed the ape. Given how advanced you were compared to humanity at that time, I'm assuming your weaponry was far beyond our early spears and clubs.
The devastating kind,
Grykor said, staring ahead into the fire, almost if the dancing flames conjured up images of the kind of destruction his ancestors' weapons could cause. I think I understand, Kelton said. There was some kind of conflict, yes? A majority of your people perished? Oh, my condolences. But that would have removed you from the top of the evolutionary chain and allowed the earliest ancestors of humanity to usurp your place there? Was the disease you and your species carried a result of the war?
a sort of lingering radioactive fallout, but on a genetic level.
We are not sick,
Grykor growled.
Your people lied. They made that up, and there was no war. It was a slaughter.
Kelton fell quiet, unsure of what to say.
Humans would stay away from us back then. We avoided them too. You slept during the night when we were awake, but you made a deal. A deal with something ancient and dangerous in the forests. A deal to even the score. You found our weapons and didn't hesitate.
No, that's... The Foundation researcher tried to protest, but the look of sadness on the ape's face stopped his sentence before he could finish.
We were almost entirely wiped out in a single day. Humans switched places with us. We became less, and they became more. They used our technology to forget about us, wipe their memories, so they wouldn't have to face up what they had done. But we will never forget.
And the Foundation, they maintain that facade, Kelton realized. That's why they tell us you're infected, that if we look at you, we'll die. They're ashamed. We all should be.
Not just ashamed,
Grykor replied.
Afraid. They fear we want revenge, retribution for what was done to our people.
And do you? The ape took another pause, as if it was pondering, or just allowing itself a moment to feel sad.
We have forgiven you, it answered.
I'm not sure we deserve that, Kelton said back, as the pair sat by the fire until the sun came up.
You've just had a night of your life in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada. You spend hours shooting craps, dancing in clubs, and eating more than your fill at the famous all-you-can-eat buffets. You're staggering back to your hotel room, high on life in the early hours of the morning when you notice something strange. A long, dark tunnel just off the side of the strip. You didn't notice it on the way in, perhaps because you were distracted by all the glitz, glamour, and hypnotic casino lights. You see the tunnel, and your overstimulated mind feels drawn to it. You stumble in and start walking. During your walk, you can feel your bones cracking. They don't shatter like you've just been hit by a train. They shift. You feel the entire shape of you bending into something different, but it doesn't stop with your skeleton. Your organs start to feel strange, and then your skin. In the complete darkness of the tunnel, you have no idea what's going on, so you just keep walking. Eventually, you find your way into a lush green forest. It's beautiful, but it feels like it should be a million miles away from the arid desert of Nevada. You were only in the tunnel for a few minutes. What gives?
Hello?
You call out.
Is anybody there?
No answer. You explore further into this empty forest. Its trees are far as the eye can see, but no animals. That's when you see something that catches your eye. A puddle of crystal clear water. But it's not the puddle itself that draws your attention. It's what reflects back at you when you stare into it. At first, you can hardly believe it, but as you move your mouth in shock and the reflection moves its mouth too, it's suddenly all too real. You've been turned into a fox, an orange, bushy-tailed fox. You scream and bolt all the way back to the tunnel that led you here. You sprint through and feel your entire body changing once more. When you finally hit the wall of dry Vegas heat on the other side, you're human again. You breathe a sigh of relief and stumble back to your hotel room. The next day, you only vaguely remember what happened, and because you're not crazy, you assume it was just all a wild dream. What you just encountered is a Euclid-class SCP known as SCP-6746, a seemingly innocent tunnel near the Vegas Strip, which holds a portal to a fantastical world designated by the Foundation as SCP-2746-1. By the time the Foundation discovered and secured the SCP-2746 tunnel and began sending their field agents and researchers on fact-finding expeditions inside, the place was already a ghost town. A forested landmass approximately 111 kilometers in diameter, with no notable signs of life. The Foundation discovered that this place had a strange effect on people and animals who came in from our world. Humans who entered assumed the form of a random animal, but retained their intelligence and vocal cords, creating talking animals. Animals brought into 2746-1 retained their animalistic intelligence, but grew human-like vocal cords, allowing them to repeat simple phrases. Before the mass exodus or extinction event that left 2746-1 barren, the Foundation figured out that this place was populated by a whole civilization of intelligent animals, like something out of a fairy tale. These animals, through a mix of brains and magic, were able to leave written records and create impressive architecture, like homes and places of worship. Foundation researchers became fascinated with how exactly this society operated and what could have led to its sudden downfall. Thanks to a mix of advanced archaeology and records left behind by the creatures, this is what the Foundation determined. The society these talking, intelligent animals lived in was a kind of religious oligarchy, meaning power was consolidated by the few in the top social class. Society was divided into 3 segments: crafters, scholars, and honorables, with the crafters being the most powerful members of society and honorables being the least powerful. The state-sponsored churches acted in worship of a being simply called the Maker, who fills a similar role to the Abrahamic God. The crafters, whose number totaled 13, were believed to be immortal and were responsible for building the majority of the culture and architecture found in 2746-1. The scholars acted as their wise assistants, and the honorables were a mixed class of artists, carpenters, and artisans. It seemed that this culture had a pretty good thing going. No system of currency was ever invented, and the economy operated on a barter system. The Foundation believes that initially, the citizens of this world didn't need to eat to survive, and so only needed to barter for material goods. Though it's worth noting that the conditions of immortality only apply to natives of this region. People born on Earth but assuming animal forms while entering 2746-1 still need nutrition to survive. However, a great tragedy soon caused a fundamental shift in the balance of life and society within 2746-1. The Maker decided it wanted to test or punish its subjects with 2 major changes. First, humans would be forbidden from entering the domain. And second, the Maker now made the consumption of food necessary for continued survival and sanity. Nothing was ever the same. Because nobody had needed to eat prior to this, food stores had never been made, and the inhabitants had no agricultural knowledge that would allow them to easily mass-produce more. As a result, while the crafters and scholars were able to feed on fruits from luxurious private gardens, the honorables were forced to resort to eating each other or other inhabitants of 2746-1. This began a bloody rift that split society from the top down. One half, led by the powerful crafters Sari and Seward, wanted to preserve society as it was and continue to worship the Maker. Sari took the form of a Flemish giant rabbit, and Seward appeared as a house cat. The opposition, led by former crafters Frederick and Agathos, with the reluctant help of a scholar named Clovis, wanted to get revenge on the Maker for all he'd done, and kill him, completely altering society. Don't be fooled by their appearances though. Many of the inhabitants of 2746-1 were fiercely intelligent sorcerers, and the apocalyptic civil war they sparked came to be known to the Foundation as Event Nachash. Like many wars, there would be no real winners here, only survivors, and even then, not for long. It was a bloody and horrific war. All attempts at finding a diplomatic solution failed. Frederick and Agathos would not stop until they had the Maker's blood on their paws. In the end, though, they were defeated, and for their traitorous crimes, they were to be punished by Sari and Seward in horrific ways to make examples of them. Since neither could die, they were given fates worse than death instead. Frederick was up first. Before the war, he'd been a leader prized for his courage and ingenuity. He'd created something known as the Great Fire, which provided the kingdom with light. For his so-called atrocities against the Maker, he was given the punishment of permanent crucifixion and relocation to a place known as the Underplane. His snout was cut off his face, and he was set permanently ablaze in a manner that would leave him forever suffering and would make him appear to look like a monster to all. Next went Agathos. She was Frederick's sister and was seen as the mastermind of many of their schemes. She would be forever encased in white clay and bled through her eyes until the sin drains from her. She's now a living crying statue, existing in a state of permanent imprisonment for her part in the crimes against the Maker. Clovis, because her involvement in the coup was unwilling, was given a more minor punishment. One of her eyes was removed, and she was permanently placed in a broken human body, effectively banishing her from her home in 2746-1 forever. Though they may have won, things didn't end much better for Sari and Siwa. The Civil War had fractured their world, and in the aftermath, the survivors chose to leave in hopes of finding a better life elsewhere. Sari and Siwa, though, felt partially responsible for everything that had happened, and so they decided to remain in their dying world. Before they themselves died, or perhaps moved on to different forms, leaving their animal bodies behind, they left a final note. It was from this note that the Foundation learned much of the story of SCP-6746. This may seem like a pretty open and shut case, another magical realm destroyed by tragedy and civil war, much like the land of fantasy in SCP-1762. But what's really bizarre here is that this is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the stories of some of these key figures in the event Nahash. First, what became of the two rebels, Agathos and Frederick? Today, they're two parts of the feared and deadly SCP-1913. Frederick, now going by Freddy, is a nightmarish faceless fire demon in the form of a dog, slavishly devoted to the protection of his sister, Agathos, now known as Agatha, still trapped in white clay, her leaking blood now deadly to the touch. Clovis is still believed to be in league with Agathos and Frederick, and may now be related to the sinister SCP-1903, a one-eyed rabbit-like human. But strangest of all is the possible truth behind Sari and Siwa, the two devotees to the Maker who remained in 2746-1 until their very last breath. In all likelihood, these two were once agents of the SCP Foundation's infamous Las Vegas branch. They took on these more animalistic forms after their deaths. Sari may have once been Agent Sarah Crowley, a Japanese-American woman who died in the line of duty in 1960. Seward was once Dr. Stuart Hayward, Crowley's partner, his new name acting as a kind of fusion of the first and last name he had in life. This is only the beginning of the animal-themed weirdness occurring around Site-45, the Foundation's Vegas branch. But this series of anomalies, collected under the term Pitch Haven, will have to wait for another video. After all, you know what they say. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Growing up in a small Virginia town near the mountains right on the border of West Virginia, Zane heard all kinds of stories from his grandmother. Tales of mountain lions who could transform into ghostly women, the Talipo, a fluffy rodent-like creature on an endless quest to get its tail back from the hunter who took it, the Mothman that appeared with glowing red eyes to warn of impending tragedy. Most of all, she warned him about the deer. "Sometimes," she used to say, "when you're out in the woods late at night, you'll see a deer acting a little bit funny. Maybe it's making strange sounds. Maybe it's standing up like a man. Maybe it's staring at you from the shadows and won't look away. If you ever see one of these deer, promise me you'll get away from it as fast as possible. Don't look at it, don't talk to it, just get far, far away." He promised her every time, but as he got older, he started to forget his grandma's stories, letting them fade away with memories of the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus. He didn't think about the stories again until he was older, a junior in college and embarking on a camping trip with his roommate Josh. They were both staying with Zane's family for the summer and had been enjoying the sunshine and fresh air. They'd gone hiking, picked blackberries, and gone fishing to their heart's content. After a while, they got sick of sleeping in the cramped house and decided to have a proper camping trip out in the mountains. Campsites were crowded this time of year, but Zane knew a spot just isolated enough that they could kick back, enjoy nature, and relax in peace. They packed their supplies and headed out into the forest for a weekend they would never forget. By nightfall, Zane and Josh had pitched their tents, built a fire, and were starting to make some dinner. They roasted hot dogs and heated cans of beans over the fire, and decided to start telling some classic scary stories. Sitting by the crackling fire, listening to the rustling leaves, snapping twigs, and the chittering of animals all around, Zane couldn't help but remember the stories he had almost forgotten. All of the strange, inexplicable things that came out after the sun went down and the forest went quiet. He thought he could hear the footsteps of something walking by their campsite, circling them.
but it was probably just his imagination. As Josh told stories about babysitters stalked by killers and drivers picking up ghostly hitchhikers, Zane was thinking about the deer. He shuddered but shook it off, and after some more stories and a few too many s'mores, the two friends decided to get some sleep. After several hours, Zane woke to the sound of Josh unzipping his tent. He sat up, ready to yell at his friend for waking him up, but the sight of Josh's pale, frightened face stopped him. "There's something here," was all Josh could say. His hands, Zane noticed, were shaking. "Hey man, it's okay, let's check it out." Zane patted Josh on the shoulder. He was pretty sure his friend just wasn't used to camping in actual nature, but reached for his hunting knife just in case. He grabbed a flashlight and switched it on, following Josh out into the darkness. He swept the beam across the clearing, and it illuminated a pair of orange eyes staring directly at him from behind a nearby tree. What the? He approached the shape, trying to get a clear look at it. As it became more illuminated, his stomach dropped. It was a deer, but something was wrong with it. Its mouth was wide open, its jaw working up and down like it was trying to make a sound, but nothing came out. But that wasn't the worst part. As the flashlight beam illuminated the animal's body, Zane realized that somehow its head was on backwards. What the? Josh appeared behind him, gasping. "Shh!" Zane shushed him intensely. He suddenly remembered his grandmother's warnings. "You know what? I don't feel so great. I think we should go back to the car and head to my place." He gave Josh a look, shaking his head as if to say, "Don't say another word." By the glow of their flashlights, the two packed up their campsite, all under the gaze of the misshapen deer. They drove home in silence, Josh only speaking once to ask, "What was that thing?" Zane shook his head. "I don't know, but it wasn't a deer." They crept back into the house and went to bed. They knew they would never speak of tonight ever again. As Zane began to drift off to sleep, his last conscious thought was to glance out the window. There in the yard, not 5 feet away, was a deer, watching. He didn't know it, but that night Zane encountered an instance of SCP-6448. SCP-6448 is an anomalous species of creatures that appear to belong to the Cervidae family, nicknamed the Not Deer. They are highly intelligent and can be distinguished from ordinary deer by unusual behavior and physical deformities. Some of these have included legs that bend backwards, the eyes of an animal other than deer, forward-facing eyes, jerky movements, lack of fear towards humans, and walking on 2 hind legs. Most notably and most frightening, SCP-6448 instances will watch and stalk humans for a duration of hours or even days. They will follow humans home and steal items from their domains, including weapons, food, and other personal items. They're most frequently found in the deep woods at night when a person is completely alone. If someone encounters an instance of SCP-6448, if they acknowledge any of the creature's anomalous traits, it will attack. In order to limit the loss of life and ensure that the SCP Foundation employees exercise the utmost caution when dealing with SCP-6448, the Cryptozoology Division issued the following guidelines. If you notice a deer that seems off, look away and ignore it. If it knows that you've noticed it, it's too late. If you hear your name, whistling, or something else in the woods calling for you, don't acknowledge it. Never acknowledge it exists. Don't respond. Don't go looking for it. Don't call back to it. If you're walking at night and you feel something breathing on your neck or whispering behind you, the key to your safety is pretending that everything is normal. Your survival is dependent on your ignorance. Whatever SCP-6448 is, they appear to be intelligent enough to understand when they are being studied, and they don't seem to like it very much. On January 11, 1994, a group of 3 SCP-6448 instances broke into Site 41 in North Carolina, using a tunnel they had carved over a long period of time. At the time, there was an instance in containment, but in all of the chaos of the breach, the specimen was lost. Every time an instance was captured and contained near SCP-6448's habitat, it would later escape via similar tunnels. SCP-6448 was officially classified by the SCP Foundation in 1980, but those from the Appalachian region have known about these strange creatures since at least 1947. From folktales and campfire stories to secondhand and even first-hand encounters, the locals are aware of the knot deer's existence and are largely familiar with the precautions necessary to avoid them. Though many of the civilians that encounter SCP-6448 avoid notifying the authorities, there have been several recorded 911 calls involving the knot deer since 2000. The following is a log of those calls. February 1, 2000. Victim, age 41 female, dialed emergency services after hearing their name being called from the woods near their home. The victim recounts the vocalization being likened to a scream in a voice that they do not recognize and requested assistance in locating the source. Emergency personnel requested the subject place their phone on the floor outside the home to listen for the alleged sounds. After 2 minutes, a vocalization was heard that was calling to the subject by name, emanating from the nearby forest. The subject was instructed to investigate the disturbance themselves and keep services updated on the situation. The victim then began to walk into the woodland, getting about 50 meters into the underbrush before inexplicably stopping. They claim there to be a noticeably large deer standing in the way of the path. She begins to walk closer, though states it does not move. Subject diverts from the path and begins walking in a different direction. After 30 minutes, no source of the voice is determined. The caller returns to their residence. June 13, 2002. Victim, age 28 male, calls 911 regarding a home break-in. The caller notes numerous items to be missing from their residence and requests an investigation. Operators dispatch 2 investigators to visit the home and pertain a potential perpetrator. The pair note that based on earlier CCTV images, all cutlery, sharp objects, firearms, light bulbs, and a single copy of the novel The Day After Roswell are missing. Also noted is that there is a complete lack of any fingerprints at the scene, with no doors or windows having been broken into. Analysis of the home's CCTV footage revealed there to be a 2-hour period of missing film, with the exception of a single frame containing a Servus nippon on its hind legs reaching towards the camera. Its frontal hooves have been warped to resemble fingers. No footage of the entity exiting the home was discovered. November 19, 2005. A cattle farmer, age 54 male, reported to local authorities the sudden disappearance of over 30% of his largest herd. Response teams searched the nearby area for 4 hours, though found no trace of his cattle. The victim was recommended to set up trail cameras and note any unusual activity overnight. At 1:11 a.m., 2 SCP-6448 are seen walking through the field before fleeing. One places an object into the ground, later discovered to be a single fork. A week after this discovery, 200 discarded bovine hooves appear at the location. March 4, 2009. Victim, age unknown, gender unknown, dials 911 to request assistance from animal services. The victim is standing within a forest in front of a Servus elephas, which is violently contorting. The victim attempts to state, "You better get a vet or something, I don't think it's well," before a piercing screech is heard and the line falls silent. Recovered footage depicts the aforementioned animal squirming, seemingly in pain. A vicious churning is audible as a black mass erupts out of the instance, and the video turns to static. October 11, 2012. Victim, age 23 male, is a junior wildlife officer at the Cherokee National Forest, Tennessee. They radio their supervisor in the early morning regarding a herd of Odicolius virginius within the reserve. Supposedly, there is a single animal that, upon first glance, appears average, though possesses divergent attributes, including backwards joints, enlarged abdomen, and forward-facing eyes. Upon stating this, a distant whistle is audible, and the victim stumbles slightly. They begin to say, "What the? Did it just whistle at me?" before the sound of hooves rapidly getting closer is heard. Notably, the hoofsteps did not sound to be in the traditional gallop of a cervid. October 12, 2012. The former victim's supervisor calls authorities following the victim's absence from the reserve night shift. Following this, their radio begins to crackle. The victim's voice can be heard on the other end, and he requests the supervisor's attention. He calls regarding a herd of Odicolius virginius within the reserve. They claim there is a single animal that upon first glance appears average, though possesses divergent attributes including backwards joints, enlarged abdomen, and forward-facing eyes. Suspecting the creature to be a rare genetic malformation, the victim requests their supervisor to come to the location. The supervisor questions the victim about what happened the night previous. There is no reply. Upon the supervisor's and law enforcement's arrival at the site, a herd of approximately 80 Odocoleus virginius was present. A single entity is in the field's center and appears to be standing separate from the rest of the group. It flees the scene upon realizing the law enforcement's presence. Where it formerly stood lay a standard two-way radio. April 8, 2016. Victim, age 35 female, dials 911 using a satellite phone distressed. They state they are in
REDACTED
County woods and are being followed. She claims that despite seeing no one for the duration of her hike, she, quote, feels as if she's being watched and has heard someone walking behind her at various points in the trip. The victim is unable to give an adequate description of their location, but knows the route to return to her residence. Operators request the victim to return to a point wherein she can provide a sufficient geographic description of her position. The victim remains on the line for the duration of the hike back to a readily used portion of the wilderness trail. Along the journey, various unnatural sounds can be heard. These include footsteps, rock slides, coughing, whispering, and whistling. Nearing the main trail, all woodland noises such as birds and wind cease suddenly, and the victim states she can see a malformed deer carcass coated in a thick layer of black slime. At this time, human screams can be heard in the distance. Operators request the victim continue and ignore the other stimuli. Agents embedded in local law enforcement suspecting SCP-6448 involved notify Gamma 4 to the situation. 20 minutes later, the victim returns to the main trail. Gamma 4, now operating the 911 call, informs the victim not to respond to any further unusual activity and briefly outlines service protocol. For the duration of the victim's journey to her home, 2 sets of breathing are audible. The victim successfully returns to her residence and shuts the door behind her. Now out of sight from SCP-6448, agents inquire of the victim's address, and the victim promptly complies. Operatives instruct the victim to have possession of all firearms and weapons on the premises and to barricade herself inside a safe space with one exit point. The victim swiftly begins grabbing all available weapons and throwing them inside a wardrobe. It is at this time there's a knock on the front door. The victim does not respond and continues to hoard sharp objects from kitchen drawers. The knocking becomes more violent as the handle is jostled and is shaken incessantly. A voice on the other side repeats the phrase, "Hello, it is me. Hello, let me in a calm manner as the door begins to shake. The victim retreats to her wardrobe armed with a small firearm. Upon sealing herself in the space, the knocking ceases, and footsteps can be heard becoming further away. The sound of galloping is audible as the front door caves in. Hoofsteps can now be heard inside the home. The entity continues to repeat, "Hello, it is me. Hello, let me in," as it searches the small building. A bright light flashes overhead, seemingly circling the house. Eventually, the entity enters the victim's bedroom. Through a small slit in the wardrobe door, the victim can see a Cervus canadensis standing on its hind legs and surveying the room. Its movements are crooked and stiff, seeming to struggle to stand in a bipedal fashion. It slouches down to a quadrupedal crouch, similar to the stance of an arachnid. It inhales heavily, and its head locks on the view of the wardrobe. It is noted as possessing human eyes. It scampers towards the subject and opens the door. A single gunshot is heard. Responders found no trace of either SCP-6448 or the victim. Containment of SCP-6448 is focused on the investigation of any deer exhibiting anomalous traits in and around the Appalachian area. Any civilian sightings of SCP-6448 are to be handled by Mobile Task Force Gamma 4, or the Green Stags. Any possible deaths resulting from SCP-6448 will be blamed on hiking accidents, and any reported sightings can be explained away with chronic wasting disease. CWD, occasionally referred to as zombie deer disease, is a prion disease affecting members of the Cervidae family. Symptoms of the illness include loss of motor function control and damage to decision-making, as well as gradual degradation of all mental faculties. It is 100% fatal. However, though the disease does exist, most recorded cases of it in the Appalachian region can actually be attributed to instances of SCP-6448. Any captured instances of SCP-6448 should be transported to Site-44 for the Cryptozoology Division's containment and study. On November 29, 2019, they finally got their chance to bring a not deer into custody. The Green Stags were able to capture an instance of SCP-6448 with the help from MTF New 7 Hammerdown and their Heavy Vehicles Division, as well as some experimental shock rifles. One not deer was knocked unconscious in the conflict, and its body was loaded onto an armored helicopter and flown straight to Site 44 in Essex, England. At the site, it was then placed in a reinforced steel containment cell and heavily sedated. This entire process went off without a hitch. As the entity began to regain consciousness, cryptozoology specialist F. Oz watched it through a one-way glass window and attempted to speak to it through the intercom. "Greetings, SCP-6448, researcher Oz began. At the sound of his voice, the creature jumped to its feet, staring at the intercom. "Can you understand me? We've seen your genus speak English just fine in the past." The animal did not answer, but began licking one of its legs and behaving as if it were an ordinary deer. Researcher Oz sighed impatiently. "Please, we know your secret." The not deer stopped what it was doing, freezing completely still as it listened to the words. Admittedly, it wasn't exactly well kept. If you just look at yourself for more than a few seconds, it is very clear that you're not normal. At this, the creature, which had been facing away from the window, swiveled its neck 180 degrees, breaking its own spine with an audible crack. It stared unblinking at the window and directly at researcher Oz. Oz turned to the containment staff, suddenly anxious. "I thought you said this was one way." The staff assured him that it was, and there was no way the not deer could see him. Still, its eyes were locked directly on his face. He shook off the sense of unease and continued his line of questioning. "Are you something imitating deer? It is clear that if so, you possess basic anatomical knowledge of them, though details are clearly faulty. In fact, a better question would be, how? If in fact you are not what you pretend to be." The not deer opened its mouth at this, revealing unusually sharp teeth. It moved its jaw as if attempting to speak, but only a choking sound came out. Shall we move on?" Oz asked. "What I'm more concerned with here is why you take our people. Is it a vendetta? Spite? Food?" For the first time in the interview, the not deer blinked. It was an unnatural movement, forced and deliberate, like the creature was attempting to engage in an ordinary behavior rather than actually experiencing an involuntary impulse. "Responding is mandatory," researcher Oz prompted. The creature did not react. "If you will not comply," Oz's tone grew stern, frustrated, "maybe you'd like to see your brand new containment cell." At last the entity spoke. Research. Its voice resembled a distorted version of Oz's. "Research? What kind of—" Oz wasn't able to finish his question. "July 7th, 1947, the creature said before ramming into the one-way glass and cracking it. As Oz stumbled backwards from the force, the creature collapsed on the ground, seizing and screaming as its abdomen. "Get the stags in here now!" Oz cried out, but it was too late. A black mass of something shiny and tendrilled leaped out of the not deer, scuttling around the cell before shattering the window and leaving the empty shell of a deer behind. The Site 44 breach system activated and attempted to initiate emergency containment protocols, but the mysterious black mass escaped its sector, made its way toward the main exit, broke through the glass of the front exit door, and vanished into the shrubbery outside. The escaped anomaly could not be found and recontained. Ever since this incident, there have been a record-breaking number of chronic wasting disease cases identified in deer in the surrounding area, as well as an unprecedented increase in UFO reports. Further research is currently ongoing, but it is unknown whether we will ever truly know what these creatures are. Only one thing is for certain: they are definitely not deer. A D-class prisoner enters the chamber. It is quiet, save for the subtle whipping sounds coming from a bizarre shape in the middle of the room. Upon closer inspection, it becomes clear that the floating object isn't one entity, but a mass of smaller objects, all floating and thrashing in the air. Their ammunition, of various calibers and sizes, spinning around in a spherical form. The D-class becomes nervous, but is ordered to proceed by Foundation personnel. Slowly, inch by anxious inch, he advances closer towards the mass of bullets. His heart knocks harder against his chest with every step he takes. The thumping begins to deafen his ears. He could feel his throat tightening up as the blood rushes to his head and sweat starts to form on his brow. The sound of the thrashing gets louder, with legs trembling and fingertips numbing. The D-Class opens his mouth in an attempt to let in a gasp of air to calm his nerves. But before he could even take a full breath, and in the blink of an eye, countless bullets suddenly burst forth from the mass, spraying the D-Class relentlessly with ammunition and killing him instantly. The Foundation personnel watching this from safety note down the events as they ponder the question: why does this mass of living ammunition act so volatile? Why are some able to approach it safely while others are killed? What is the secret of SCP-577? Classified as Euclid, SCP-577 began as one of the most mysterious objects in Foundation custody, an animated mass of ammunition. Those who are able to get close enough to it observe that the plurality of bullets inside were 9mm, accompanied by a selection of 10mm and 45 caliber rounds. The bullets are normally calm, moving in predictable patterns and occasionally shifting the mass to reflect other shapes, including cats and dogs. But something else about the mass concerns the Foundation more and more. The mass is growing. It is dramatically larger than it was when it was first acquired by the Foundation, and it seems to be adding approximately 1,000 bullets per year. This raises the question, can it be contained permanently? Currently, it is held in a standard large containment unit, but its quarters have been reinforced with the Foundation's best steel blast shielding. Due to the danger to anyone who opens the door, the entire facility is handled with remote technology and can only be opened by approved personnel. But someone needs to check that everything is stable. The Foundation learned the hard way that entering the containment unit was a bad idea. Any Foundation staff, ranging from a high-level scientist to a standard security officer, is met with immediate hostility from SCP-577's massive bullets the second they approach the entity. The bullets shoot out from the mass with speed of a standard handgun, aiming directly at their target. This indicates that SCP-577 is intelligent, it is capable of seeing and reacting, and it hates Foundation personnel with a passion. Fortunately, the Foundation doesn't have to sacrifice its permanent staff. SCP-577 is not the first entity to react with hostility towards its captors. After all, few of the specimens are happy to be permanently contained in secure facilities. So it was determined that D-Class personnel would be sent into the facility twice a year to inspect it for any damage, making sure the entity was still secure, and test SCP-577's reaction to the presence of different people not from the Foundation's staff. And that's where things got interesting. Many of the D-Class personnel didn't trigger the entity at all, resulting in neutral behavior. However, those D-Class who were initially Foundation staff and demoted due to broken policy were met with the same hostility as current staff, indicating that SCP-577 was not going to be fooled easily. The same happened with some D-Class with a specific background, who was immediately sprayed with a violent hail of bullets causing injury or death. Upon investigation, every single one of those D-Class was revealed to previously be a member of law enforcement. However, some D-Class personnel were met with a very different reaction. These people were the most likely to see the other side of SCP-577, when it reduced its hostile stance and instead took on a friendly form. Appearing as a dog or cat, it would even approach the D-Class in a welcoming manner. This was most likely to happen when the D-Class was formerly homeless or had spent time in the prison system. But one incident brought SCP-577's true nature into a new light. D-28126 was the latest unfortunate conscript to be sent into SCP-577's chamber for an annual cleaning and inspection. His duties were simple, including to inspect the walls for damage, clean out any stray material left around by the bullets firing, as well as any corpses that were left behind, and make any needed repairs to the walls. He would be wearing protective gear, but that wasn't always enough to protect someone from the hail of bullets. And no one knew exactly how the volatile mass of bullets would react. But from the second the D-Class entered, it was clear that this would be a very different encounter. As soon as D-28126 entered, SCP-577 seemed to take on a friendly posture. It shapeshifted into the form of a large cat and would frequently approach the D-Class while he was cleaning. The D-Class was confused at first, but soon seemed to appreciate the company. He would occasionally stop cleaning to pet the cat made out of bullets.
but as the work went on, he seemed to slow down. He appeared to be crying, and eventually he stopped working entirely and slumped against the wall. The Foundation attempted communication with him, but the D-Class didn't respond. Soon, SCP-577 joined him against the wall, and the D-Class held him. His hand was guided into the mass of bullets, and it soon emerged holding a single bullet. The D-Class held the strange entity for a few more minutes, before the staff's insistence that he exit the chamber grew stronger. He eventually left, and the Foundation took him back into custody and examined the bullet he was holding. It was not a normal bullet. The bullet was moving, almost as if it was a beating heart as it throbbed up and down. Upon closer inspection, it was revealed to be covered with blood, but D-28126 had not been hit by the bullet. He was completely uninjured, but when he emerged from the chamber, his hand was covered in blood, exactly where he had inserted it into the mass of bullets. The bullet was sent to SCP facilities for testing. The blood was not a match for D-28126, but it was genetically similar, like a relative. The D-Class was brought back into the interrogation chamber and the bullet was returned to him. He was apparently linked to SCP-577 somehow, and identified himself by his name, Arturo Rojas. His interviewer, Dr. Vanderbilt, asked him to explain what happened, and Arturo explained that the mass of bullets didn't just turn into a cat. It turned into a cat he knew as a child, which had a uniquely shaped tail that he would recognize anywhere. The cat that was once helped by Arturo and his brother. Arturo was questioned why he quit working and began crying, and revealed that he heard the mass of bullets say something, barely audible. SCP-577 had whispered, "I'm sorry." But what would a cat have to be sorry for? Arturo became angry when Dr. Vanderbilt questioned this, but Dr. Vanderbilt continued and conceded that Arturo recognized the cat somehow. He prodded Arturo to share the rest of his story, and Arturo eventually revealed the root of his bond to SCP-577. Arturo and his deaf brother Ricardo were homeless at a young age, after their mother threw them out. While they were living on the streets, they met a cat that they gave a little of their food to from time to time. The little cat became their constant companion. They named him Duck, after Arturo's brother's favorite sign language gesture. But tragedy was just around the corner. Duck and Ricardo were inseparable, with the little cat essentially becoming a therapy pet to the boy. But one day Ricardo encountered a police officer. The deaf boy couldn't understand the officer's orders, and the officer didn't know or didn't bother to use sign language. Ultimately, bullets were fired. Ricardo was killed. Another unarmed young man killed in a police shooting, and Duck was left alone. But the cat had one more job to do. He had led Arturo back to his brother. The area was swarming with police, and Arturo never got a chance to say goodbye. He lashed out at the only one he could, Duck. The cat tried to comfort his surviving person, but Arturo threw rocks at the cat and chased him away. He never saw the cat again and was left alone with his grief. He saw on the news days later that the officer was cleared in the shooting. His brother was blamed for threatening the officer, and the news implied that Ricardo was a gang member. Arturo was left without closure, until SCP-577 entered the picture. Dr. Vanderbilt expressed his sympathies, but wasn't sure what any of this had to do with the entity. Arturo explained further why he started crying when he felt the pulsating bullet. He spent years sleeping next to Ricardo, and he recognized his brother's heartbeat. The bullet was his brother's heart, or at least contained his essence. And for the first time in 10 years, Arturo was able to make peace not just with the cat he had rejected out of grief, but with the brother he had lost far too long. The Foundation had answers, but they only led to more questions. Arturo had pulled a single bullet out of the massive SCP-577, and it was the one containing his brother's heart. Was this the bullet that killed Ricardo? Was every bullet in the mass one that killed a person? Was the mass growing with every new death? And if that was the case, did the mass contain the memory and pain of every life a bullet took? If so, that would explain the compassion the entity seems to hold for those who had been homeless or imprisoned, as well as its intense hostility for any sort of law enforcement figure. For now, SCP-577 remains stable and contained within its unit, needing only standard upkeep of its cell to avoid any breaches. But as it continues to grow, Foundation authorities worry that it may get strong enough to eventually breach containment.
But this is a tricky case for the Foundation. The entity's growth is out of their control, and nothing they've done to date has stopped or slowed it in any way. It seems something on the outside is making it grow, and shows no sign of slowing down anytime soon.
Why do so many of the indigenous cultures of the colder regions of North America seem to share the same legend? A legend that tells of a monster that lurks in the forests, bringing cold and death to any that meet it. This creature is an omen of famine, a territorial beast that preys on human beings. Some cultures describe it as an unholy abomination, a spirit of winter and a warning against the dangers of selfishness, one that is created whenever a person resorts to cannibalism in order to survive. It will gladly devour any man, woman, or child that wanders into its territory, holding a horrifying and insatiable hunger for human flesh. So how did so many cultures end up with the same story? Could it be because it's real? Depictions of the beast vary, but it is most commonly recognized by its tall skeletal form, like a body exhumed from the grave, even carrying the stench of death and decay with it. Anyone who encounters one risks being eaten or transformed into a creature just like it. The monster's name means an evil spirit that devours mankind, though to even say the name is taboo, as it's believed to give power to the beast. Of course, these are all just legends, right? Stories to warn against the dangers of greed and selfishness, but otherwise nothing to fear. There's no proof that such a beast could actually be roaming the frozen wastes. Many at the SCP Foundation felt the same way, until they heard about SCP-323, the Wendigo's skull. Kept under lock and key by the Foundation with around-the-clock surveillance, SCP-323 is an anomalous object with ties to the various Wendigo legends. As the object's moniker suggests, SCP-323 is a skull, not a human skull, mind you. It more closely resembles a cervid skull. Cervids are a family of mammals that include most varieties of deer, elk, and other similar animals, and this particular cervid skull sports a tall pair of antlers. SCP-323 is definitely not a fresh skull either. It shows signs of weathering and a few scars across the surface, looking as if the bone has been bleached and eroded through exposure to the elements. The skull is also missing its lower jaw, and has a sizable hole on the rear underside that may have been carved using stone tools. SCP-323 is kept restrained inside an armored container within a concrete containment cell, and personnel are only ever allowed near it to check the restraints for signs of damage. Additionally, any Foundation staff that enter SCP-323's cell must be accompanied by an armed security officer, and in the event of a containment breach, the entire site is to be evacuated. Seems like a lot of precautions and safety measures for an old piece of bone. Surely a harmless deer skull could never be that dangerous, right? Wrong. You might be forgiven for thinking that a skull can't possibly cause harm. After all, SCP-323 is just a skull, then whatever animal it belonged to is dead. But this skull is far more than it appears to be. Through extensive testing, the SCP Foundation's researchers have learned that the skull isn't dead. No, this skull is awake and aware. It can see, hear, and has a sense of touch, and it can and will react to various stimuli. However, this does not necessarily mean that SCP-323 is alive or even sentient, but it definitely appears to have some level of sapience. It will target certain members of personnel that get too close, and has attempted multiple times to breach containment. It also reacts violently to anyone speaking English or French near it, the only two languages prohibited inside SCP-323's cell. So while the skull is not technically alive, it is definitely aware. Still, why the need for so many protocols to keep it contained? It's not as if a skull can just walk off on its own. Of course not. But SCP-323 can move, at least to a certain degree, often in a reactionary manner. SCP-323 will vibrate or move on its own, for example, turning to watch as personnel enter its containment cell. In most cases, these movements are tiny and insignificant, but other times the skull lunges, launching itself at Foundation personnel as it desperately tries to get free. Now you know why it's kept restrained. So, we have an antlered cervid skull that can move and has a low level of awareness. On their own, these would be more than enough to warrant the Foundation's interest, but the anomalous properties of SCP-323 don't stop there. The skull has an inherent ability to influence the minds of those around it. Anyone spending an hour within a 15-meter radius of SCP-323 is likely to experience the effects of this influential power. This will often result in them exhibiting uncharacteristic behaviors, thoughts, and urges, including cannibalistic tendencies and outbursts of random violence. Almost 3/4 of people that suffer the influence of SCP-323 will feel an overwhelming compulsion to take the Wendigo skull and fit their heads into the chiseled hole on the rear underside. If someone attempting this finds that their head is too big to fit inside the hollow skull, there have been cases of individuals trying to bludgeon their heads on any hard surface they can find nearby in an attempt to get their head down to a more manageable size. This will continue until one of 3 outcomes occurs. 1. The person manages to fit their head into the skull. 2. They cause themselves so much cranial damage that they are rendered unconscious. Or 3. They end up killing themselves through repeated violent head trauma. Of course, if a person actually manages to fit their head inside SCP-323, then that is a different story entirely. In these instances, the individual becomes classified as an instance of SCP-323-1. Within 10 minutes of wearing the skull, this person will suffer dramatic changes to their body. Any and all body fat will be rapidly shed as their hair also begins to fall out, leaving them looking starved and almost skeletal in appearance. Their distal phalanges, those are the bones at the tip of the fingers, will elongate and rupture the skin as they become bony, claw-like appendages. The subject will also find that their teeth have grown abnormally long and sharp, while their limbs will blacken as if they were suffering frostbite symptoms. Along with their external transformations, SCP-323-1 will also get increased strength and heightened resistance to pain. They aren't invulnerable though, and can still sustain damage and injuries. SCP-323 will also have a dramatic change happen to their metabolism, which will occur a few minutes into the physical transformation. The subject will now need an almost constant intake of calories, which, if they don't receive, will cause them to starve almost instantly. With the transformation process complete, the new instance of SCP-323-1 has finally become the Wendigo, a terrifying monster with one goal: to feed. The SCP-323 instance will seek out any human beings it can find so that it can feed upon their flesh. Those who have witnessed the 323 instance in the midst of a feeding frenzy have described the way it violently slaughtered any person it could find, leaving only a mess of blood as it devoured them, their screams mixed in with the sounds of bones crunching. In the times that the creature cannot find a human to nourish its monstrous appetite, it will try to keep itself alive any way it can. Sometimes it will slow down its movement to try and conserve energy. Other times it will ration whatever food is available to it, saving some of its last meal for a leftover snack. And on occasion, the monster will engage in auto-cannibalism, a form of cannibalism that involves eating parts of itself. Humans certainly seem to be its preferred food source though. Even when other sources of meat would be easier to acquire, SCP-323-1 will zero in on human beings and will do anything it can to make a person its next meal. When chasing down its prey, human or otherwise, SCP-323-1 has been observed uttering phrases either spoken in the primary language of whoever was transformed by the skull, or in the Severn Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Cree languages. These are all native languages of the numerous indigenous creatures that shared legends of the Wendigo. Where do the phrases come from, though? Are they another side effect of SCP-323's influence? Or do they originate from the skull itself? The Foundation's researchers are still trying to figure that out, and at the moment, they have no clues as to where they come from. In one containment breach in 2006, during which an instance of SCP-323-1 was able to kill and devour 12 members of Foundation personnel, on-site surveillance recorded audio of the creature speaking. It rasped, while dragging a body behind it. After this, the sound of a wet cracking noise was recorded, possibly one of the victim's bones being broken by SCP-323-1 so it could get to the marrow inside. The 323-1 instance does at times seem to try and resist the influence of the Wendigo skull. Additional recordings capture the creature saying, the creature then said, followed by noises of it eating the body. It seems that even the Wendigo has its own internal struggles, perhaps showing that there is still something left of the human who put on the skull, and that deep down they are fighting against their cannibalistic impulses. But where exactly did the Foundation find SCP-323? And is it really the skull of an actual Wendigo, the famous creature from North American legend? In 1997, the SCP Foundation sent a detachment to Bitterron Lake in Saskatchewan, Canada. There had been reports of a local community murdering individuals and leaving their bodies in the forest to appease a dangerous creature residing nearby. This creature, as it was later discovered, was an instance of SCP-323-1. Someone had found the skull and succumbed to its influence, placing it on their head and turning into a monster. Ever since, the locals had been killing people and offering up their dead bodies as sustenance, fearful of what would happen if they didn't, after being brought up with legends of the Wendigo. SCP Foundation agents were able to capture the beast, however it died of starvation while being transported back to containment. They also covered up the recent deaths in the area by giving the local residents amnestics, and creating a cover story about an unidentified serial killer. Prior to this, James Namagoose, a local man who was involved in the murders, was brought in for questioning. He remained oddly calm when interviewed, but admitted he had helped move the bodies that were being offered up as food for SCP-323-1, or as he called it, the Wendigo. According to James, a local story among the Cree people told of men who had once tried to control a Wendigo, and perhaps even tame it through offerings of food. Whether or not James and his fellow locals had the same intention, their primary concern was keeping themselves safe. He described first encountering the creature, a warped man walking out of the woods, killed our friends right in front of us. Sometimes it would stare more than it would make to kill, try to talk to you. It whispered at me, "Pe misto, come and eat." It made me cold in my bones. As the interview continued, James claimed that he felt like he understood this warped man. He described feeling like the Wendigo was encouraging him to kill, that the creature would help him pass when his own time came. James told the Foundation doctor questioning him that he had heard the creature in his mind, and he felt it watching him almost constantly. Mr. Namagoose stated that he hoped in killing people as offerings to the Wendigo, that his own family would be spared. Like the other locals, James Namagoose was given amnestics to forget all about the creature and the murders he'd played a part in committing. So far, none of the Foundation's staff have experienced any similar behavioral effects to those James described. Those who work closely with SCP-323 or have witnessed an instance of SCP-323-1 have felt the creature communicating with them, or urging them to kill on its behalf. Ultimately, who is to say if SCP-323 is the skull of a Wendigo like those from legends? It certainly seems like it is, but with no way to tell exactly how old the skull is. Perhaps it's actually the reverse, and it was the Wendigo legend that spawned from instances of SCP-323-1 that were first encountered by indigenous North American cultures hundreds of years ago. One thing is for certain: if you ever come across a skull with tall antlers, you should try to resist putting it on. Otherwise, you might not be feeling like yourself for much longer. On an ordinary day in 1991, a young man known by the initials JS went on a hike with 4 of his friends on the wooded outskirts of their small town. Everything seemed perfectly normal until JS began to feel a strange sense of familiarity, like he had been in this spot before. He couldn't shake this weird feeling, but thought nothing more of it. Little did he know that this was a sign of deadly things to come.
Several hours after first experiencing that sense of deja vu, JS was found by the side of the road, covered in cuts and scratches, with his friends nowhere to be found. This is the story of SCP-939, an unforgettable monster that you'll never remember. There was no way for JS to know that the unsettling feeling he felt and the horrors that followed it were the result of an experiment conducted by the SCP Foundation, an experiment with deadly unforeseen consequences. JS and his friends were exposed to a substance known only as AMN-C227 as part of a series of tests performed by the SCP Foundation, intended to determine the effectiveness of this substance as a deliberate amnestic. Dealing with as many mysterious, secret creatures and objects as they do, the SCP Foundation has long needed a way to tamper with the memories of those exposed to the Foundation's various prisoners and test subjects. And when the Foundation discovered AMN-C227, it seemed like it might be perfect for this purpose. So where did AMN-C227 come from? Over a year before the incident with JS and his friends, the SCP Foundation captured SCP-939. SCP-939 is a species of endothermic predators that live and hunt in packs. They are designated Keter class and regarded as highly dangerous and hostile to human life. Native to caves, they have no eyes, translucent red skin, and stand at an average of 2.2 meters tall, with an average weight of 250 kilograms. They have 4 limbs, each ending in 3 fingered claws and a 4th opposable digit resembling a thumb. In addition to their sharp claws, their mouths are filled with red fang-like teeth that reach up to 6 centimeters in length. In place of their absent eyes, they have light-sensitive spots running along their backs, which are covered in spines believed to detect changes in air pressure and flow. In addition to their many other terrifying attributes, the internal anatomy of SCP-939 poses a biological mystery. These creatures have no circulatory system and no digestive tract. That's right, in spite of being predators seemingly acting on a need to feed, they have no stomach. Instead, when they eat, their food builds up in their respiratory system until its presence inhibits function, and then it is regurgitated. In spite of being a creature that should not, under any logical conditions, be able to live, SCP-939 continues to persist, and is even capable of giving birth to live young after a gestation period of 12 months. The SCP Foundation was able to study a litter of these young that were born in captivity in September of 1992, though the creatures remain just as much of a scientific mystery as they were upon first discovery. Everything about them seems to defy the logic of the natural world, which, to be fair, is really nothing new for the Foundation. The respiratory system of SCP-939 was found to exhale small traces of an airborne amnestic substance, given the name AMN-C227. This compound blocks the formation of memories for the duration of exposure to it, plus a 30-minute period following the exposure, give or take a few minutes. It is colorless, odorless, tasteless, and completely undetectable in the bloodstream after only 60 minutes. AMN-C227 was approved for use as a Class C amnestic by the SCP Foundation in 1990, following some initial tests. However, after one particular incident involving a young man and his friends, the official use of AMN-C227 was suspended. JS and 3 of his 4 friends were previously given a dose of AMN-C227, though the details of why they were given the amnestic has since been stricken from the record. Several months after being exposed to AMN-C227, JS and his friends went out on their ill-fated hiking trip. While hiking, JS was suddenly overcome with a sense of deja vu. When he mentioned it to his friends, 3 of them agreed that they had felt it too. One of the group, another young man who had not been exposed to AMN-C227, was uncomfortable and decided to go home. JS and the remaining 3 members of the group made the choice to stay in the woods and try to determine what was triggering the unusual feeling of familiarity. As they got closer and closer to a large cave near the hiking trail, the sense of having been there before grew stronger and stronger. Armed with only one flashlight and a foolish curiosity, the 4 went inside the cave. They made their way deeper and deeper and deeper into the darkness, not knowing why they felt this way or what they might find inside. None of the group could explain just what felt so familiar, only that the further they made their way into the cave, the more pronounced the feeling became. It was getting late, and they knew they should have been afraid to venture so deep into a cave with only one light source and no knowledge of what lay inside. But still, they pressed on. One of the group remarked that they should turn back, but the others refused to listen. They wanted to know what they were getting close to, what was drawing them deeper and deeper into the cave. Unfortunately for them, they would get their answer. In the heart of the cave was a pack of SCP-939, waiting patiently for their prey to wander into their domain. There are no witnesses to account for what exactly happened to JS and his companions, but we can reasonably piece the events together from what happened after. Once the friends reached the heart of the cave, the creatures were on them in seconds, raking them with their sharp claws and biting with their fangs. SCP-939 are larger and stronger than most people, so it was probably not much of a fight. However, while his friends were being devoured, JS was somehow able to scramble out of the cave and make his way into the woods in search of help. Under the influence of the AMC-227 that had built up in the cave from the presence of the pack of SCP-939, JS lost a large portion of his memory of the event. He found himself on the side of the highway late at night, seriously injured and his clothes ripped. An officer found him there and asked him to stay still and remain calm until an ambulance could arrive. JS was still in a panic and attempted to run away from the officer, begging to be released so that he could get away. He babbled incoherently about the color red, screaming over and over again about the red, though when prompted, he could not explain what the red he was screaming about referred to. His friends were not with him. Just as the officer managed to calm JS, the ambulance arrived. Its flashing red lights sent him into another frenzy, and he attempted to escape custody, claiming that the red lights were going to get him. The official police report described JS as perhaps being under the influence of a powerful hallucinogen, that he was just having a bad trip, but the SCP Foundation knew better. The Foundation conducted an interview with JS about his experience, and determined that SCP-939 was certainly involved. As part of their cover-up effort, they strongly implicated JS in the disappearance and the death of his friends. He was convicted of manslaughter, though the bodies of his friends were never found. It is rumored that the SCP Foundation hired him on a prison work release program, and that he now works as a member of the janitorial staff at one of the Foundation's facilities. This incident led to the suspension of the use of AMN-C227, as it revealed some vital and disturbing information about the compound's side effects. After the exposure to AMN-C227, a person who found themselves exposed to it again would experience a sense of familiarity and felt compelled to investigate the source of this feeling. Essentially, anyone treated with AMN-C227 are not made aware of the existence and danger of SCP-939 would become a perfect victim, primed to be attracted to dens of SCP-939. It is likely that this side effect is not a coincidence, but rather a deliberate hunting tactic designed to attract prey that had somehow managed to escape. With no memory of their attack at the hands of SCP-939, this previous intended prey would find themselves drawn to the same den or even a new one, not knowing that they were walking back into near certain death. While the SCP Foundation suspended the use of AMN-C227 as a Class C amnestic, they did recruit a team of SCP field operatives to take advantage of this side effect. This team of operatives were deliberately administered a dose of AMN-C227 and briefed on its effects, as well as the dangers of following the feeling of déjà vu should it surface in the field. These infected officers were essentially used as bloodhounds, relying on any sense of unusual familiarity to sniff out new dens of SCP-939 so they could be captured and contained by the Foundation. As far as we know, this operation is still ongoing today. However, now that the Foundation has a sufficient number of specimens to study, additional dens of SCP-939 that are discovered are ordered to be immediately destroyed. As for the SCP-939 still in captivity, they are contained in environmentally regulated and negatively pressured cells with walls of reinforced concrete. The doors to the cells are airtight to prevent the leakage of any AMN-C227, and any personnel that interact with one of the creatures is required to wear level C hazmat gear to avoid exposure and follow decontamination procedures upon exiting the cell. All SCP-939 have subdermal tracking devices implanted to find them in the event of escape. Only one SCP-939 has given birth in the time that the creatures have been in captivity. Strangely, SCP-939 young look indistinguishable from human infants and change their physical appearance at some yet unknown point as they age. If any more offspring are produced, they will immediately be separated from the parent and studied. All that we know is that they are found in caves in the woods outside of a small town. It could be any town, even yours. So, if you're ever out hiking and struck with a sudden feeling of déjà vu, don't investigate. Don't get curious. just go home. It might just save your life.
Listen closely. It's very important that you pay attention to the visuals you're seeing and the words you're hearing. You may think you've heard this story before. You get that funny feeling, déjà vu. But trust me, this is all very much new to you. This is the story of a dangerous species of anomalous creature dubbed SCP-939, also known as With Many Voices. On October 28, 1981, it all started with an SCP Foundation field agent going missing while on duty. The whole case had smelled like death from the beginning. On the edge of an undisclosed city in an undisclosed American state, civilians had been going missing in unusually high numbers. This would be a concerning state of affairs in and of itself, but things went up a notch when law enforcement operatives sent to investigate them disappeared too. Disappearances are hard enough to cover up. Law enforcement disappearances are a nightmare. If only it stopped there. When the Foundation agent went missing, alarm bells were ringing across the entire district. What the hell kind of threat could take out civilians, trained law enforcement officers, and even Foundation operatives? Naturally, the next step in this escalation of force was to dispatch a heavily armed and well-prepared tactical security force, known as Trapper, from the nearest Foundation containment site. These were 6 of the best tactical operators from the sector. Whatever it was that killed or took out the others, it wouldn't do the same to them, or at least, not all of them. The team breached an abandoned multi-level warehouse on the edge of town. Based on the estimated points of disappearances for the various victims, it was the most feasible location of an anomalous threat. They used explosive charges to enter the building and stormed in, assault rifles and submachine guns blazing. The team split up to search different parts of the complex, in a move that even the Mystery Gang could tell you doesn't often work out well. Though many Scooby-Doo episodes might have played out differently if Shaggy was wielding a Heckler & Koch HK-416. It didn't take long for the overpowering stenches of death and decay to assail the team's nostrils. They'd worked for the SCP Foundation for long enough to know the distinctive sickly sweet aroma of rotting human flesh from memory. With heightened awareness, they continued through the building, searching for the source of that awful smell. A member of the team radioed in when they made the first grisly discovery: the corpse of a missing Foundation field agent, killed by what seemed to be one huge bite, taking a fatal chunk from his neck. Some kind of animalistic beast had taken his life in a single decisive strike. Once again, the danger level had elevated for the Trapper team, but it was about to get a whole lot worse for all of them. Some of the team that had split to check the upper floors of the warehouse suddenly heard the most terrible shrieking from the lower levels. They heard their teammates calling for help, clearly distressed. They weren't even using their radios. They just kept screaming and yelling, begging the others to come down there and help them. But as the rest of the team descended into the lower levels, they soon realized that they'd been lured into a trap by beasts far more intelligent and diabolical than they'd ever imagined. This was the story of the first time SCP Foundation operatives ran into specimens of SCP-939 and lived to tell the tale. In the darkness below that abandoned warehouse building, they discovered a teeming den of monsters. Large quadrupedal beasts with translucent red skin and long, vicious spines streaking their back. Trails of human flesh dangled from their long fangs. The monsters were standing atop the corpses of the team members who'd been calling for help moments before. Or rather, seemed like they were calling for help moments before. The SCP-939 instances had borrowed the voices of their prey to order a slightly more substantial dinner from above. One of the 2 most potent abilities of SCP-939 is their power to mimic voices and do so with genuinely terrifying accuracy. It is currently unknown to the Foundation how exactly they do this, because 939 specimens don't actually need to hear a voice before they can imitate it, and the complex structure of their imitations and speech patterns suggests a far greater level of intelligence than their more superficially bestial nature implies. Theoretically, you could hold an entire conversation with a 939 behind a screen door, and have no idea that your conversation partner was a creature that would be just as happy to chew the head off your neck as they would be to talk to you. Speaking of which, back to the Trapper team. The survivors were cornered by a gaggle of monsters using the voices of their dead teammates. The creatures advanced with dripping fangs, preparing to lunge and add another few bodies to the count. Thankfully, the survivors thought fast, opening fire and escaping out into the hall as the creatures pursued. After a tense firefight and calling in a hefty contingent of reinforcements from a nearby containment site, the trapper team just barely got the situation under control, narrowly avoiding becoming just another voice in the repertoire of this particular 939 nest. The Foundation were able to capture several viable specimens and bring them in for containment and study. While some lives were lost, the monsters were caught. But 939 stands apart from the rest of the anomalous crowd in a number of ways, including the fact that its true horrors were only unleashed after containment. The trapper team that had fought tooth and nail to apprehend the creatures in the first place began to behave strangely during debriefing. Despite their communication devices recording a relatively clear audio account of the incident, the survivors experienced odd lapses in memory, details that likely would have been burned into the mind of anyone else experiencing these events were completely absent from the recollections of the team members. It was a phenomenon the Foundation had only seen once before. It was the exact kind of behavior exhibited by people who have undergone amnestic treatment. It was this comparison that led them to discovering SCP-939's second potent anomalous effect. They quite literally breathe a form of aerosolized amnestic, dubbed AMN-C227. It inhibits the part of the brain that allows people to form memories for the duration of their exposure to the gas, creating a kind of memory camouflage that 939 specimens are able to hide in. The gas is odorless, colorless, and tasteless. You could be standing in a room full of it and never even know. The only tell that you'd ever have memories erased by AMN-C227 is a strange sense of déjà vu you'll experience if you return to the point of exposure. It was an amnestic compound so effective, the Foundation floated the idea of using it for their own purposes, seeing as it's a lot easier to get AMN-C227 from 939 than the usual method of sacrifices to Anatashisha. From perfect voice mimicry to impeccable memory erasing, with the added bonus of intelligent pack hunting and an exceedingly powerful bite strength, 939 appeared to be a species of perfect predators for luring in and killing humans. Naturally, the Foundation had questions, chief among them being, what the hell are these things and how do they work? The more the Foundation experimented on SCP-939, the more they became keenly aware of the fact that these things don't operate like any other living being. Almost all of their internal systems, from veins to their digestive system, are entirely vestigial. Beneath their translucent skin, these monsters are effectively dead. Nothing works, and somehow nothing needs to work. They consume human flesh, but the flesh simply rots in their stomach until they later vomit it out. Nothing about their biology explains how they produce amnestics, or how they even technically survive. One sample was fully dissected, its different vital systems placed into various tubes, and the monster still tries to talk to Foundation personnel as they walk past its containment location. Some of the creature's childish ranting was recorded for posterity, and the recordings are nothing short of truly chilling.
Have you seen our pictures? We like drawing. Daddy hung them on the wall, except for sometimes when the others in white coats took them away. Daddy told us not to draw pictures like those. They made him sad. So we did our best to draw other things, but sometimes we forgot. Sometimes Daddy hid the pictures or ripped them up. He told us that it wasn't that he didn't like them. He said it was to keep us safe from the mean doctors in the white coats, but then the doctors took Daddy away.
And some of the things said by this dissected creature have been even more disturbing.
We got so hungry, it was bad, but we ate our old skin and our old head. It tasted good, but it was still bad. We were still hungry after that and asked for food. They gave us food, even our favorites, but none of it tasted right to us. All that tasted good was one piece of meat. We asked for more of that.
In hopes of understanding their biology better, the Foundation also decided to run some samples through SCP-914 The Clockworks. As expected, the coarse and rough settings destroyed and deconstructed the creature. The data on the 1-to-1 setting was redacted, but most frightening of all was the results of the fine and very fine experiments. For the fine setting, the creature simply came back dead. For the very fine setting, the creature had been reduced to a smoldering pile of white ash. The only conclusion we can take from this is that, on a truly cosmic level, 939 is meant to be dead. And just when you think that SCP-939 has hit the ceiling on true horror, the monsters continue to impress by raising that nightmarish bar. After 11 years in containment, one of the 939 specimens gave birth to a litter of infants. This doesn't seem all that horrifying, seeing as being able to reproduce would at least give 939 something in common with the rest of the animal kingdom. But the Foundation were horrified to find that the larval stage of SCP-939 looks pretty much identical to a human baby. Researchers who were ordered to dissect these creatures, finding out in the process that they were identical to human infants on the inside too, were offered amnestics due to the understandably traumatic nature of the experience. One of the births was stillborn, and the others quickly cannibalized it. The surviving beasts soon learned to perfectly imitate the voices and behavior of human children, offering yet another reason that you cannot trust any of your senses when it comes to SCP-939. As they grew and matured, the more human parts simply fell off, like a snake shedding its skin, after a period of prolonged pain and discomfort. More so than most creatures the Foundation contains, SCP-939's very existence is enough to cause a sense of existential dread. And for a creature as full of surprises as SCP-939, of course there would be another twist in the long red tail. You see, we mentioned earlier that the SCP Foundation briefly considered using AMN-C227, the amnestic gas exhaled by 939 specimens, as a form of Class B amnestics. However, this plan was later cancelled when a horrifying side effect came to light. Amnesia is never a good feeling. Having complete blank spots in your memory is actually extremely distressing to experience. And as we mentioned earlier, people exposed to AMN-C227 seem to experience a palpable sense of déjà vu. When they first experience it, it'll be mild, but it'll slowly get stronger as they move towards the source. Little by little, you'll feel satisfaction drawing closer, until you're wandering into a deep, dark cave. And before you know it, a set of red jaws are closing around your neck, and it's all over. That's right. AMN-C227 not only wipes the memories of encounters with SCP-939, it also lures any survivors back into the lair of the creatures. They've been given the Keter class because there's a whole species of these things, and even the Foundation's best scientists can't know for sure how far their habitats extend. They could be waiting for you right now, ready to call to you in a friendly voice. So remember, kids, don't believe everything you hear. After all, sounds can be deceiving.
When the sun rose on that fateful day, Jerry Marks had been one of the lucky ones. He worked in a mine deep underground at the edge of a small town in the rural United States, which meant he didn't see what happened when day broke, when the light of the sun ravaged the earth. The first Jerry heard about it was when his son Kyle came racing into the mine, frantically tapping his dad's shoulder to get his attention. He'd run all the way from their tiny homestead under a fireproof blanket, thick and long enough to block the sunlight from touching any part of Kyle's skin. His older sister, Jerry's daughter Carly, hadn't been so lucky. Caught by the light, her body had turned to the consistency of warm candle wax, melting into a form that barely resembled human anymore. Jerry had been one of a handful of others working late in the mines that day. A few thought that young Kyle had made the whole story up and ventured up to the surface and into the light, only to meet the same twisted fate. The light morphed their bodies into monstrosities, anyone in the small rural community becoming an amorphous mass of human flesh. Eventually, those that stayed behind in the mine heard the voices of their loved ones, their wives, husbands, children, all calling out to them from outside. They promised that nothing was wrong, that it was a lovely sunny day outside, and the mine workers should clock out to come and enjoy it. More of them left, reassured by hearing their families that all was well, and once more, none of them were seen again. Only Jerry and Kyle were left, and it stayed that way for several months. The father and son had to adapt to life underground, only leaving the mine to forage for food, and only while wearing thick, dirty mining overalls, making sure not a single millimeter of skin was on display. If the sunlight touched them, they'd never make it back alive. Venturing out of the mine in his overalls, Jerry had seen the shuffling melted mass that had once been the townsfolk. He did his best to avoid it as he went house to house, making sure it never saw him while he raided cupboards and refrigerators. But he could see it, and among the blobs of bodies blended together, he saw something that resembled his daughter. It turned his stomach, not just knowing but actually witnessing what had happened to her. And it was made all the worse on the days that Carly called out to him and Kyle while they hid in the mine. It was clearly her voice, but there was something wrong about it. Perhaps knowing that she was a part of the melted monstrosity made it easier to resist her trying to coax them out into the light. It had almost been an entire year of life spent underground when Jerry and Kyle encountered their first actual human beings since all the other workers had left the mine. The pair that arrived were strange, wearing protective suits that covered them both head to toe. Just like Jerry and Kyle had quickly realized, these two were aware that not even the tiniest hint of the sun's unforgiving light could be allowed to reach them. The two approached Jerry and Kyle, seemingly coming in peace, although the father and son remained cautious of the newcomers. Making sure they were deep enough in the mine to avoid the sunlight at the stony entrance, the pair of them revealed their faces, confirming they were still fully human, before introducing themselves as Researcher Worth and Sergeant Booker of the SCP Foundation. Sitting down with Jerry, Worth explained what had really happened. He had been working for an organization that contained and studied anomalous creatures and phenomena, the Foundation. Booker had been a member of a special armed unit within the same establishment, or a mobile task force. But now the SCP Foundation itself had fallen, with a number of its own personnel turned into more of the amorphous fleshy creatures in the sunlight. "We spent a lot of years keeping all of this from the public," Worth admitted, sounding guilty, but implying the choice was out of his hands. "But I don't suppose there's any point in secrets anymore. It's the sun, you see, Mr. Marks."
You can call me Jerry," he interrupted.
"Sorry, Jerry," Worth corrected himself. "But something happened to the sun. It changed, decimated the entire planet in barely any time at all. I mean, all those people, millions, billions, all at once. Dear God." Worth took a moment as the existential dread of it all once again caught up with him. "It turned out the biggest anomaly was right above us," Booker continued for him. She sounded a lot more stoic, even a little coldly detached from it all. SCP-001, that's what the Foundation called it.
"Is there a way to reverse it, or cure the people that the sunlight, changes?"
Jerry asked, thinking of Carly. "You mean SCP-001-A? No, I'm sorry, Jerry, there's nothing we can do," the researcher said, failing to sound as recomposed as he pretended to be. "Your daughter is gone, but at least you still have your—" Worth paused, looking around at the mine. Even in the low light, there was no sign of Kyle. Jerry turned to scan the area. To his horror, his son had seemed to have vanished while they were talking. Instantly, panic caused him to think that Kyle had wandered out of the mine and into the sunlight, turning into part of what Worth had called SCP-001-A. But the boy would have had to walk past Jerry to start heading that direction. Plus, the father knew his son was far too scared to go outside after seeing what the son had done to Carly. Booker had a tactical bag filled with equipment, flashlights, spare batteries, even flares for whenever the power in those ran out. And both working and living in the mine so long, Jerry had maps, knew certain routes through the deep network of tunnels almost by heart. Between them, the three had enough to mount a search for the missing boy. Keeping together, they traversed away from the first of several large chambers, down into the dark depths of the mine.
"Kyle!"
his father yelled, his voice echoing through the tunnel.
"Kyle, buddy, it's Dad! You there?"
Walking behind him, Researcher Worth and Sergeant Booker parroted the calls, assuring the missing boy that they didn't mean him or Jerry any harm. As the trio walked deeper and deeper, they began to venture into a portion of the mine that had hardly been used by the workers. It was darker than the areas further up, while those had rows of electric lamps powered by long cables attached to generators. Down here, the only light came from the flashlights the group carried.
"Kyle, come on out!"
Jerry called out for his son again.
"This isn't the time to split up. We need to stick together. Come on, son, I'm really worried here."
Once again, there was no answer. Just then, Jerry caught the sight of Booker and Worth out of the corner of his eye. Both of them knew a lot about SCP-001. and the mine worker couldn't help the suspicion that added to his perception of them. After all, Kyle had never run off before now, and Jerry couldn't help but think, while his attention had been turned, that the pair of Foundation personnel had taken his son. "Dad?" a voice suddenly called out. Jerry's head spun on a swivel at the sound of Kyle calling for him. "Dad, where are you?" It echoed through the tunnel again.
That's him,
Jerry exclaimed to the other two.
Which way did they come from?
"Straight ahead, it sounds like," Booker replied. "Hold on," Worth interjected. "I think you two should look at this." The beam from his flashlight was pointed at the rocky floor of the tunnel. Something was gleaming wet against the stone, a large smear of red, like something had been dragged in the direction Kyle's voice was coming from.
Oh God, he could be hurt,
Jerry said urgently. "Hurt might not be the right word, I'm afraid, Jerry," the researcher said solemnly. "There's a lot of blood here, too much."
"All the more reason to go further and find where he's calling from,"
the father retorted angrily. "That's if it is the kid that's actually calling us," Booker replied, her and Worth exchanging a worried glance at each other.
"You two know something, don't you?"
Jerry demanded.
"Does that thing from the outside, does it have my son too?"
"Dad?" another voice called. Jerry froze, his blood as cold as the mine tunnel he stood in. He hadn't heard that voice in almost a year, but recognized it immediately. It was Carly, his daughter. It seemed impossible. He knew she had been merged into part of SCP-001-A when day broke, but now she was somehow calling out to Jerry. Her voice sounded clearer, like it had used to before she changed, and she wasn't trying to lure her father out into the sunlight either. For a moment, it seemed to Jerry like his daughter had somehow come back.
"Dad, we're both over here,"
Carly's voice called again.
"We need your help, Kyle's stuck."
"Who's that?" Booker whispered. That's Carly," Jerry sniffed, holding back tears. "You said your daughter became a part of SCP-001-A, Worth pointed out.
Maybe she got better,"
the father asked hopefully. "I hate to say it, but that's definitely not her," Sergeant Booker replied. "We should turn back now if there's an anomaly in these tunnels. That's not going to be pretty for any of us," she added, turning to Worth.
"What?"
Jerry yelled.
"What do you mean by that?"
"Look, buddy, those aren't your children," the MTF agent said bluntly. "It sounded like SCP-001-A got them." No, the voices are too clear," Worth replied. "I think something else is in here." Before Jerry could explode with anger at how uninterested both Foundation personnel seemed at the fate of his children, another sound was heard. Footsteps, something shuffling closer, patting its feet on the stone. There was a low growl that filled the tunnel, as whatever it was came closer still. "Dad?" the voice of Carly repeated, sounding only a few feet away now. "Where are you, Dad?" Kyle's voice immediately followed it. Behind came the sound of Booker striking a flare. As it erupted into a plume of light and heat, she threw it down the tunnel, and there they were. Not Jerry's children, but instead a pair of nightmarish creatures. They backed away from the flare slightly. The light still illuminated their blood-red forms, walking on all fours like wolves. The creatures' elongated heads were missing any eyes, just jaws filled with rows of sharp red fangs. "Dad," came Kyle's voice again, emanating from one of the monsters. It was mimicking Jerry's son, both of his kids. Even having seen SCP-001-A at a distance, the father could barely believe his eyes. 939s! Booker yelled the second her flare illuminated them. "Run!" She pulled a sidearm and opened fire, the bang of each shot ringing loudly through the tunnel. The pair of 939s pounced at her while Jerry and Worth turned to run back the way they had come. As the creatures attacked, the echoes of the gunfire were replaced with blood-curdling screams.
"What the hell are those things?"
Jerry yelled in a panic.
"SCP-939,
Researcher Worth panted.
"Too much to explain. They're pack hunters and they're vicious. What about Kyle and Carly? I heard their voices." "That's what those monsters do. They mimic human speech to draw us out. We're their prey. There's no telling how long they've been down here. They might have retreated to the mine to avoid the sun on the surface,"
Worth yelled. The sound of the SCP-939s getting closer were catching up, right on Jerry and Worth's heels.
"Why would they come down here for?"
The mine worker huffed, slightly ahead of the researcher given his slightly stronger physique.
"To escape the sunlight,"
Worth replied.
"SCP-939s hate
His sentence was overtaken by a scream as one of the blood-red creatures caught Worth by the ankle, knocking him down and pulling him back to be devoured. Jerry didn't look back. He just kept running back through the tunnel. The sound of SCP-939 calling after him in Kyle and Carly's voices made it even harder not to stop and turn, even just for a second. But he reminded himself that if he stopped running, then he couldn't lure the creatures out of the mine and into the sunlight. It wasn't how he'd ever wanted to go out, but maybe that way Jerry would see his kids again. Now go and check out SCP-001 Can SCP-049 Finally Cure When Day Breaks? And SCP-001 When Day Breaks, SCP-682 for more horrifying When Day Breaks scenarios.